Boy, doesn't a bucket of chicken sound good right now? This is Tony Cook, the co-editor of HO Collector Magazine. If you're enjoying this NMRAx presentation, remember to subscribe to the channel and click the little bell icon, and then you'll receive updates whenever there's new content out. Thanks for viewing.
Welcome back. This is NMRAx, the May update, I believe, of 2023. I'm Speed at the bottom of the helix, and today is our May update, as I said, with 3 clinics. We also have the breakout rooms ready for people who want to go hang out with each other and also talk to the clinician afterwards. And that would be at whereby.com/OMRG Oscar Mary Rudolph George, my way of saying it. Um, Brad will also attempt to post that in the chat. So our next presenter models the Southern Railway in the late 1970s, focusing on prototypical operations of the Saluda grade and Murphy branch in western North Carolina. He's an avid researcher of these lines with a goal of recreating as much of the 1970s as possible on his own HO scale Southern Railways Carolina Division. He's also the superintendent of the Carolina Mountain Division of the Southeast region and is working on his Master Model Railroad certificate, program, degree. Please welcome Paul Spilman.
Hello, everyone. So in this clinic today, we're going to be talking about how to dig up the past using modern methods, things that you can, access on your computer from the comfort of your own home. A lot of things have disappeared uh, from the past. Present day, there's no evidence left of it, but there are ways we can research these things to learn more about them for modeling purposes. Whether it's an old rail line that's been abandoned and torn up, structures that are no longer there because of development, things like that. So we're going to be discussing three major things or ways to research this, and a few more ideas on ways you can further your research online. So we'll get started. So first up, a lot of people probably model a railroad that now looks like this. Not much to see here today. There haven't been rails on this ground since 1988. Nature is slowly taking back over. Although, from the ground level, you can still see quite easily where the line was, but maybe from other like satellite view or something like that, it's not visible. But up until 1975, they had very interesting power on this little short line. This was the Graham County Railroad in western North Carolina. They had Shea running until 75, hauling freight. They were out of business for a few years and then had a 1 year reattempt at opening in 1982. But after that, it folded for good and was torn up. This location was a very, very important industry on the Murphy branch in the late 70s. One of the more critical industries to model, but unfortunately, Walmart doesn't care about that old factory. And if they want the land, they're going to buy it and tear it down. So, for modeling purposes, there's not a whole lot to go on. Nobody really cared to take pictures of this, but luckily, at least somebody was in a plane and decided to photograph it. So these things are gone, but that doesn't mean that we can't accurately model them. So in this clinic, I'm going to show you how to dig up the past, and everything we're going to talk about is easy and free. I will have a handout available in the file section that has links to everything we're going to talk about. So if you want to just wait for that, or you could try to take a picture of the screen, I've got the links on slides as well. So we'll get started. First up, Google Earth Pro. This is one of the most versatile and powerful tools we're going to work with today. It's free to download. There are paid versions of this, but there is a free for non-commercial use option here. And there's a lot of different features and ways to use this program. We're going to talk about the most common and useful ways to research, railroads and buildings, things like that. And there may be other ways that you can use this program, but we'll just talk about some of the most obvious ones. So, what can we do with Google Earth? First and easiest, it has a built-in historical aerial imagery tool. So depending on the area you are looking at, it will have various years of historical imagery. I've seen areas that it goes back to 1930, but for most places, you're only going to get useful imagery for stuff 1990 and later. In this case, we've got a 1995 aerial on the left and the current shot 2023 on the right. This was the largest rayon factory in the United States, the American Inca rayon plant in Inca, North Carolina. And it closed down in 2008. And unfortunately, they tore down the more interesting side of it that was, the rail served side. They left the back part open for some sublet industries there. But, so we can actually get some pretty good detail zooming in on this built-in imagery. You can see, lots of details on tanks, piping, where the rails are, smaller structures, and you can get a lot of stuff off of these to model it. Now, obviously, this is going to depend heavily on when a structure was torn down or when a line was removed, how useful this will be. If it was torn down in 1920, yeah, you're not going to get anything useful here. But if it was still around after about 1990, you've got a pretty good shot of getting some good information using the built-in aerial imagery. Other than that, you're going to get something that's basically absolutely worthless. This is the 1985 imagery of the same location. So they say. The white blob is supposedly the factory. Your guess is as good as mine on if that's actually the case, but that's what they say it is. So pre-90, I've pretty much seen nothing of use. You're talking, you might just be able to tell what's forest and what's fields or city earlier than that. So you're not going to be able to see rail lines or individual structures, anything like that. So, just if your structure or rail line was around then, you got a good chance of seeing it after 1990. So how do we use this? It's very, very simple. Up in the toolbar at the top of the map screen, there is a clock icon with a counterclockwise arrow. Simply click on that, and it's going to bring up a slider in the top left of the screen. There are arrows at each end and white dashes in the blue bar that indicate a set of imagery for that area. And you can simply click on the arrows to move forward or backwards through time, or click directly on one of the white lines to take you to that imagery. Very simple to use. So what's one example of how we can use this? This is just one pretty obvious way. You can see the gap in the tree cover to the left of the red line there. That's the old railroad grade that we were looking at in the very first picture. You can see it in many places still today, but in a lot of places, development, logging, new, wider roads, things like that have erased it from the map. So it's kind of, you can't really trace the entire route using present day imagery. But the earliest available for this area is 1994, and it's pretty much completely visible. 6 years after the rails were removed, most everything is still going to be, open. Going a little bit farther down the line, here we can see a few more places where if you know what you're looking for, know that the rail line used to be there, you can see where it ran. Some places it's been totally erased. Other places you got some clues. So it's kind of, guessing in some areas. But if we use the earlier imagery, we can trace out the actual line and then overlay it on present day. This is pretty useful if you want to go, see one section in person, something like that. Here's the 94 imagery of that same location, and you can clearly see the right of way pretty much all the way through this scene here. And there's the tracks overlaid. And zooming out, we can recreate the entire line from beginning to end using this 94 imagery. trace that out right there. And like I said, if we want to see where it is today, switch back to uh, current imagery, and you can, pretty much do whatever you want to with that. Zoom in, see where, what's there now, what might be left, things like that. So how do we do this? And that's a tool in Google Earth called Paths. Very simple. There's a button at the toolbar. Looks like 3 dots connected by a line, says Add Path. And it's basically you can create any line you wish. Any shape, any size, any length, whatever. You just click, make a line, and that creates a path. And a path can be overlaid on any imagery or layers in Google Earth. And we'll come back to that later on and show you just what that means. Once you click the Create a Path tool, you get a pop-up where you can name it. You can pick a color for the line, change the width, make it thicker or thinner. If you've got multiple paths you are interested in creating, you can, make one red, one blue, so you can tell the difference, things like that. And once you've, picked your color, put a name there if you wish, just simply click on one spot on the map and click somewhere else, and it's going to draw a line between those 2 points, and you can put as many points on there as you will. So you can see here we've started tracing the right of way. Every point has a little dot that is movable. So if you don't quite get it exactly where you needed it to be the first time, you can move that point just a little bit to get it in line. It can be a little bit tricky when you first start this, because intuitively you want to move the map the same way you do when you're not creating a path. But if you try to do that, you're going to put 100 little dots, and it's going to create a mess. So you've got to use your keyboard arrows to move the map, and then only use the mouse to click on spots where you want to add a point. I forget periodically, and then I have to undo a bunch of little dots that are clogging up the screen there. But it's very simple once you get the hang of it. And when you're done, it will tell you how long the path is, feet, miles, kilometers, if you need that. So very useful if you're looking to measure out something like how long a spur to a factory was, something like that. Very useful in some situations. And when you're finished, you can save it, and it will go to your Places tab on the left of the screen there. So you can see this one was for the Graham County Railroad, so it's been saved as the grahamcounty.kmz. And then just to point this out while we're here, the bottom left has the layers tools. You can add and remove different layers on the map. I pretty much remove everything except borders and labels and terrain. I'll check roads back if I get kind of disoriented, or the roads have significantly changed since the time I'm looking for something, like with the historical imagery, just to get reference. But I generally leave it unchecked because it just clutters the screen up. But you can, play with those different layers and, see what worked best for you on that. Next up, we have place marks. This is a single point, just marking one point on the map. Again, it's visible across all the layers and imagery available. And it's very easy to use as well. Just click on the little push pin icon on the toolbar, and it's going to drop a pin on the map. By default, that pin will be in the center of the screen or the view that you're on right at that moment, but you can drag it over to whatever spot you want it to be on. You can create a name for that, which is going to be very useful, of course. And then you can also change the color of the icon as well. The place mark is going to be tied to the exact GPS coordinates of that location. And it's also going to be tied to the camera view of how you're looking at the map when you create the place mark. So in Google Earth, you can actually zoom in, tilt, pan, so you can get some pretty creative views. And so if you're in a low angle view of that spot, when you create the place mark, if you click on it to go back to it, the camera is going to, zoom back to that starting point where you were. You can modify that later. So if you, accidentally create it when it's in a weird view, you can make it to where it's back to a top down view. So all these tools are fully modifiable. You can change anything later on if you wish. Very easy to do. Place marks are useful for pretty much any fixed point, milepost, or one obvious example. In this case, this is the red line is the Southern Railway Murphy branch. This is the red marble grade. Milepost 88 is the only milepost that still exists. And the other three, I was trying to pin down where they were using photos, track charts, things like that. So I started working on that and wanted to, mark those out for where they actually existed instead of just trying to make, handwritten notes on it. And I think I'm pretty close. I've got photos of 87 and 90, so I can get that pretty accurately. But 89, I had nothing except a reference to the track chart that it was between two curved sections. So that's why I put approximate right there. So, you can do all kinds of different things. I mean, if you want to mark a building or an industry, anything like that, and those will show up in your places tool on the left side. So you can just simply click on that and it'll take you back to it if you want to zoom into that location quickly and easily. Next up, we got the ruler tool. It's a ruler icon up on the toolbar, and you can use this to measure pretty much anything on the map, including the historical imagery. If you got a building, a bridge, siding, spur, anything like that, you can use this tool to measure it out. So if you click on the Show Ruler tool, it's going to bring up a pop-up box where you can select whether you're going to measure a line, which is just 2 points, a path, which is as many points as you want, a polygon where you measure the square footage or something like that, and then they also have a circle ruler tool as well. And it's going to tell you the length. You can adjust that to feet, meters, miles, whatever. There's many options available on what it will measure in. So in this case, wanted to know how big this warehouse was. So we get our ruler tool and click on the two corners of the building, and we can tell it's roughly 440 feet long. You're not going to get down to the 1/4 inch or anything like that on this. This is just going to give you a rough estimate of how big something is. Now, at least for the modern imagery, I can tell you it is fairly close. If you kind of account for overhangs of the eaves of a roof or something like that, you're going to be within a foot if you get zoomed in all the way and use the ruler at that point. So it can be very accurate for you. Measuring the back wall, we get 404 feet thereabouts. And then there's little couple tanks down here, and just out of curiosity, that's 32 feet in diameter. So, you can do a lot of stuff with this. If you switch over to the path, we could have measured the length of the spur that comes off there in between the tank and the corner of that warehouse building. A little hard to tell in this shot, but that's what that is. So we're going to come back to Google Earth, but we're going to switch over to another tool that can be combined with Google Earth to do some pretty neat things. And that's going to be the United States Geological Survey TopoView website. This website gives you access to the historical topo maps going back to 1884. So anything that was created by the USGS for an area, they have digitized it and put it on this website. So some places you get back all the way to the 1880s. Other places, they didn't do anything until, the 30s or the 50s. It just depends on what area you're looking at. You're going to get all kinds of different maps here, different dates, different scales, different types. So we'll, be able to search for, what's more useful to us. And everything on here is free to download and print in various formats, and we'll cover all of that. And it's pretty simple. You go to the website, and there's a Get Maps button up at the top. Just simply click on that, and it's going to take you to the initial view of the Topo Map tool. So anything we have that is shaded in red is going to be covered by a topo map. But first, let's look at the two toolbars. We got the skinny one on the left and the large one on the right. On the left, we've got the topo view link takes you back to the main page. We've got zoom in and out. The globe takes you back to the starting view we just saw a second ago. And if you've been opening and closing different topo maps, the back forward arrows will cycle you through those maps that you've been looking at, help. And then the bottom tool will take you to where you are located. Your computer will share your location. And if you click on that, it'll ask for permission to share, and it'll just take you to where you are. Up at the top left, we've got the 3 view options. By default, it is selected to terrain. We also have a satellite view and the most current topo map view. I've found that satellite makes it really difficult to see a lot of things, so I pretty much leave it on terrain and just stick with that. On the right, we've got the search box at the top, a date range slider, and a filter for scale. We'll talk about each of those 3 and see how to use each of those here in just a second. All right, so let's find a map. Basically, just type in the nearest town name in the search box, and you can either hit enter or click on the search icon there with your mouse. And the way topo maps are labeled is usually the largest town or most important town in the map, but you should be able to find by any town in the map with your search. But if you don't get a result, pick the next biggest town nearby. So if we put in Robbinsville, North Carolina, and hit enter, it is going to bring us to the search results that bring up Robbinsville. So up at the top right, there's a little red circle next to the search box that shows 26. That means we have 26 maps covering this area. The first one was from 1935, and it goes all the way to 2022. And so we're highlighted in red. So that means that the topo map is covering this area. And you'll notice that the first map is selected in the search list on the right there, and it's kind of expanded with some more information. So by default, the first one will always be selected and expanded. And so if we zoom out, you can either use the zoom tool or use your mouse scroll wheel. We can see what that map is covering. So in this case, we can see the darker red outline, and then the shaded red inside that is going to be exactly what this map in particular is covering. Say, for example, that we were actually looking for the town of Snowbird or the town of Cheoah on the left or right edges of this map, and it kind of splits it. It's pretty easy. You can simply click on the map over to the side, whether it's left, right, top, bottom, and it will change to highlight the map that you clicked on. So if you kind of search for something and it's not exactly where you needed it to be, just click off to the area that you're actually looking for, and it will switch over to that actual map. All right, let's look at a different map. Let's scroll down and look at this 1955 map from down here in the list. And we'll notice that the boundaries have changed. We haven't changed our zoom, but the red shading has changed. And that just depends on the date of the map, the scale, or the map type. So if we zoom out, we can see that this map covers a much, much bigger area. So if you're not familiar with how topo maps work, the scale is what will tell you how big the map is. And the smaller the scale, the more detail you're going to get. So our first map was 1 to 24,000 scale. That's the ones that we're most interested in, because that's the ones that are going to give us the detail. The 1 to 250,000, which we're looking at now, there's going to be a good chance that you're not even going to see railroad line marked on this map. That it's just too big. And so we can filter by the scale. If we click the 24K circle on the scale filter there, it will filter down to just the maps that are the 24,000 scale. So you can see our red circle up there has changed from down to 16 maps, just showing that we've filtered that out to show just what we're interested in. And if we're even more interested in narrowing it down, we can use the date range slider to get a narrower date range. So in this case, we searched between 1923 and 1980 and narrowed that down to just 10 results. All right, let's look at the individual results in detail. So each result, when you click on it, is going to pop up and give you a little bit more information. So in this, we'll go through this. First up is the map name. It's just going to give you the largest or most important city in that map. And under that, it's going to have the year it was created, followed by the map type and the collection that it's in parentheses there. Basically, most of these are going to be the HTMC, which means Historical Topo Map Collection, but some of them may be U.S. Topo Map Collection. And then the year may be different in that, and that'll just mean that the year it was published or updated. So you may see a 1935 map and then a 1942 edition. So it may have been updated, but nothing significantly changed. Behind that's the scale. And then the picture of the map is a shortcut that will open up that map as a JPEG in a new window. Below that, there's download options. And on the bottom row, we've got several things, but of most interest are the show and zoom buttons. The show will basically overlay the topo map on the initial view that we have seen so far. And then if you've kind of zoomed in and out and gotten, all over the place, you can click zoom and it will center that map that we've clicked on and fill the screen with it. Just makes it real quick and easy to get back to the best view of that map. So here you can see we've clicked the show button for this 1935 topo, and it's overlaid it on the screen there. And it actually adds another option once you click show, and that's called map transparency. It's a slider, and you can, if you need to like reference, in this case, we've got nearly 100 years of changes. So you can actually see the modern map overlaid with the historical map by adjusting this transparency. So here you can see we've drug the transparency slider to roughly 30% or so, and you can see how the highway there used to hug the mountainside, and today it's now been widened and straightened. So you can kind of get a reference of what kind of changes have taken place. Seeing both maps one on top of each other. So that's pretty useful. And then you can also download the maps. There's a few options here. First up, we have JPEG. This is a very low detail file. You're not going to get a whole lot of information out of it, but if you want more, you can download the GeoTIFF, which is a zipped TIFF file. So you can share that as just a regular image. And there's also a GeoPDF. So if you just want it as a something to have a reference for later, the PDF is recommended. Again, if you click on the image, it will open as a JPEG in a new window. And you can see here that the JPEG is on the left and the PDF is on the right. The PDF is much cleaner and clearer, and you can zoom in much closer and keep the details. So if you're going to want to be referencing these for later, stay with the PDF or the TIFF, depending on how you want to use that image or just as a file. JPEG's not very useful for any kind of detail. But there's one more option on the downloads, and so let's look at that. KMZ. What is this? This is where the real fun of this website begins, when we can combine it with Google Earth. The KMZ file is the raw data of the topo map. And if you click on the download KMZ, you're going to get a zipped file. And if you have Google Earth installed on your computer, it opens up and you get the topo map overlaid into Google Earth. You may be thinking, okay, big deal. It's the same thing, just in a different program, but not really, because you can go into a very immersive 3D view, because again, this is the raw data of the topo lines, the roads, everything on that map is simply computer code that Google Earth understands and will, instead of showing you what it normally shows, overlays that instead. So we can actually zoom and basically fly down this valley here following the river, and it's going to be the topo map, not just the modern imagery. It is very, very cool, especially in the mountains, to be able to get a low down view, seeing what the terrain looks like. Seeing, like in this example, the blue line is the Murphy Branch, following the tracks there. It's just very neat being able to see this. Kansas, not so much. Sorry, guys in Kansas, but you're not going to get a really great view out of this. And if you go back to the straight down view where the map ends, you can see the imagery next to it, and you can see that it's close, but it's not perfectly lined up with everything else. So the blue line is our right of way that we traced earlier using the 1994 aerial built into Google Earth. And then on the left, you can see the 1940 topo. So, I mean, realistically, you can't complain too much about it being off a few feet with 80 years of differences in technology. So it's going to get you the information you need of roughly where something was. But the real benefit to this is when you have no aerial imagery to work with. So this rail line right here was extremely important in 1943, very critical to the war effort, but there's no aerial photos that remain. And that's because it's been underwater since 1944. The Southern Railway originally followed the Tuckasegee River when it left Bryson City. 1880s, that was typical, easier grades, easier construction. But with World War II, Fontana Dam was needed for power generation for Oak Ridge, and they had to flood out these valleys, causing Southern to relocate the line. And only in extremely low water do any signs remain of this original route. For reference, the town in the upper left corner, Bushnell, is under 230 feet of water when the lake is full. So we can use this 1940 topo to create a path tracing that original route. So here we've traced it out in red, just marking that as closely as we can using the topo. And then if we go into the options for the topo map, it also has a transparency option, and we can adjust that transparency to see the topo and the modern imagery visible together. And earlier I mentioned that paths, place marks, all that does not change based on the imagery or layer. So you can see that the path is still completely visible regardless of what we do with the topos or the imagery. So makes it very easy to reference something. If you create the path based on that town or rail line, whatever, you can see it no matter what you're looking at, because there's other things that you could add into Google Earth, but we're not going to get into that. So, what else can we do with this? If you're modeling Bushnell, we know where the sighting was. We know where the branch that went off to the actual location of the dam, that's the one going off to the left. And the Murphy Branch continued across the river off to the lower right of this view. And, there are photos available. I mean, they documented the line heavily before they flooded it, but this can give us some more information. For example, if we wanted to know how long the sighting was, we can use the ruler and switch it over to path and mark that out and figure out that it was roughly 810 feet long, give or take. Things like that. Here's another example. This is the Tallulah Falls Railway in Franklin, North Carolina. It was abandoned and pulled up by 1962, and in many places near Franklin, it's been completely erased by development. Here is a topo showing the Y right outside of town, and the modern bypass is pretty much completely erased most of that Y when they graded that, but we could know for sure where it was by using the earlier topo and overlaying it on the map. Here's another example of using the transparency. We've got the end of the railroad. It was intended to go further originally, never made it past Franklin. So they kind of just ended it right there at the road. But as we adjust the transparency, we can see just what, where that line was based on what's there today. It's completely been erased by development in this area. And in other places, we don't even necessarily need the topo map overlay to, if you know what you're looking at, to see where something was. So here we can see the river originally looped around this little elevated section. They had 2 trestles at each end of it, but just lots of little things that you can learn by combining these tools. So let's put this all together from beginning to end. This is Bryson City, North Carolina. This is a busy little corner right here on the Tuckasegee River. You can see the Murphy Branch going across the center of the screen, crossing the river. But this is where the original alignment and the new alignment diverged when they flooded Fontana. So here's the original Y, and the original line continued off to the left instead of crossing the river. So let's trace that out with a path showing where the Y was. And since we know that the other tracks are going to be relevant, we trace those out as well. We had a siding. There was a coal trestle, fuel oil dealer, things like that. So just trace everything out. You can use different paths or all one path, just depending on how you want to. And if we adjust the transparency, we can see the alignment is not perfect, but it's pretty close. Again, this is 80 years of technology improvements. They didn't have GPS and the precision we do today. So I'm actually rather impressed they got so close with what they had. So now you can see that where the new alignment is, we can trace that out. And you can also see why the Y was removed, because the new alignment actually begins gaining elevation there, and so they couldn't have both. So here's the new alignment in blue. And our earliest imagery is 1994. We can see that we're pretty darn close, but still a little off on the at least the original alignment in red. And one little note is they did use like the first couple thousand feet of the original alignment as the spur to the factory right there on the left with the big white building. So we can actually trace that because it's still visible in 94. And then if we overlay everything together, you can see we're close, but not exact. But there's also one other thing. Down at the bottom, you can see that there's looks like another industry there, and that was a pulpwood dealer. So we can actually now trace that out as the spur for the industry. That was a pulpwood dealer and then a sawmill in the dead center there, but as far as I know, it was never rail served. And then you can see the tanks of the oil dealer at the mainline end of the spur. So a little messy when you combine it all, but what I did is, using some best guesses, I kind of adjusted the original alignment to account for the road. The road probably didn't move, so you can use some common sense and adjust those lines from the earliest topos to, get you a little bit closer to where you want to be. And that's everything put together. So if you're, trying to reference this for, depending on the area you want to model, if you're interested in the Y, this will give you a pretty good idea of where that Y would have ran and how everything connected. So that's just one example of how I recreated this little corner with basically call it 3 different eras of tracks. Next up, we have historic aerials. Many people may be familiar with this website, but if you're not, it's a free website that gives you aerial imagery from various dates, although it is heavily watermarked. and they do periodically add new imagery. So I had one where I was looking for an overhead of a location, and Historic Aerials didn't have it, Google Earth didn't have it, and I just happened to check again, and bam, they had added 2 years of that one spot and told me everything I needed to know. And you can purchase images or get it printed, and it will remove the watermarks, but it is not what I would consider to be super cheap. So just, depending on how bad you want the watermark removed. It's a very simple website to use. You go to historicaerials.com and click the View Images button in the center. And it's going to bring you to a map. So just simply type in the town you are looking for and hit enter. It'll take you there. And on the left, you have a button for aerials. And clicking on it, it will give you a list of all the different years that imagery is available for that area. And so we picked our earliest option here, and you can see the watermarks covering it. And I promise you, if you got one thing in particular you're looking for, that watermark will be over the top of it. And the watermarks move as you zoom in and pan around the map, and it never fails that it covers the most important thing. Here's that pulpwood yard from a minute ago. You can see 3 pulpwood racks there at the kind of bottom center of the screen, and then the sawmill up to the upper right. And eventually you may be scrolling around and run into blackness. And that just means that the imagery that you've selected is no longer available. And just click on a different year and it will, put the new imagery over that. And, hopefully it will cover that area. You're not always going to get the imagery for every single place, especially the earlier you go. I'm not entirely sure what the earliest they have for historic aerials, but it can definitely go back a lot farther than the built-in to Google Earth, with much higher quality overall. All right, and finally, this is more just an idea of what you can do with local resources, city, county, state, and this is things like planning and zoning, your economic development authorities, and the DOT. The DOT has been a gold mine for me from North Carolina. And the key for a lot of these searches is don't necessarily put in a railroad related search. Look for, the road names or industry names, things like that. It might get you some very useful information. One example, this is the crest of Saluda Grade at Saluda, North Carolina. On the left, we have a 1966 photo of the highway crossing the tracks, and on the right we have a 1988 photo. Those are the only 2 photos I've ever seen showing the bridge itself. If you're at Saluda, why are you taking a picture of a bridge and not the train? But luckily, at least 2 people took photos. But when exactly was that bridge replaced? I'm close, so I could go down there and look, and I didn't see a bridge build date on it. A lot of times they cast it in the concrete. I just didn't see it. But if you're 2,000 miles away from the area you're modeling, you may not have this luxury. So North Carolina DOT has a publicly available list of all bridges divided by county. And in this case, we've got Highway 176 crossing Southern Railroad, built in 1967. So I now know that the current bridge is appropriate for me modeling 1978. Little things like this you can just dig up online for free. In the 1950s, the DOT started taking aerial photos. They took thousands of them of the highways and surrounding areas, and they put them all on this free website online. Each little dot up in the top left shows you the center of where a photo was taken, and they categorize it by decade and then by quality. So high zoom, low zoom, whatever. And guess what? A lot of these covered railroad areas. This is Asheville Yard. They took several right over the yard itself. Very, very useful. And then one of the gold mines I discovered, the city of Asheville had an intern that had nothing to do. And he found a stack of USD aerials from 3 different years and asked if his project for the summer be stitching these together. And he created a website for it with the purpose of showing growth of the city over the years. And so we have 51, 63, and 75. And as you move one map, the others move with it, so you could see the same place on all 4 years. In this case, the yard was covered. So we've got the roundhouse here, the turntable there in 1951, no longer there in 75, it was removed sometime in the early 50s. But this is just, one of the little nuggets that I dug up that it's super, super useful, that something very similar may be available for your area. So that's pretty much it. Like I said, the copy of the handout will be available on the file section of the Facebook group. And if you are interested, you can also email me. That's my email right there. Take a picture of that if you want a copy of it or ask me any questions. So with that, does anybody have any questions from the chat?
Oops, sorry about that. How about now? At the bottom of the you mentioned the maps are expensive. Can you give us an idea how much?
For historic aerials,
Yes.
depending on the size, you can get, I think they do it by pixels. I think you can do like a single image for, $1 or something, or you can get a monthly subscription that gives you, I want to say like 50 or 100 or 200. You could, pick how many you want. And it's, I don't know, 20, 30 bucks, if I remember right, for that subscription.
Okay.
It's not something you can, get just one image for, 50 cents or something. It's kind of expensive for what you get.
Cool. So how much time do you spend in this digital map world?
If I'm looking for something specific, I've spent hours tracing out routes or, historic aerials. I've been on there scrolling through, just making notes of the differences from year to year. I mean, it just depends on what I'm looking for. I mean, it's definitely a rabbit hole you can go down quite easily.
The where did you say you got that bridge information when it was built?
So a lot of the State Department of Transportations, they have a database of bridges available on their websites. I just simply Googled, North Carolina DOT bridge constructions. A lot of states have some highly deficient bridges, and they maintain these databases showing, that we've got, 200 bridges that are 60 years old that we need money for. It's kind of a publicity for funding stunt as much as it is for just pure information.
Cool. Oh, question from a viewer. How accurate are track arrangements for yards and other places where there's multiple tracks?
For the topo maps, I would say the yard itself probably not super accurate for the count, but for spurs off to the side, they're probably pretty reasonably accurate.
Pretty neat.
That just probably depends on, how big the yard is as well. I mean, if it's a smaller yard, they may have put the detail in. Honestly, I don't know that I've ever looked at, say, Asheville Yard and counted from the topos versus what reality is. You'd probably be better off trying to find a ICC valuation map for yard tracks. They're going to actually count and be very, very accurate with that.
So how many miles are you covering in your Carolina division?
My intention is to cover the entire Murphy branch, 114 miles, in a, obviously highly compressed format, hitting the most every town. That's the goal. We'll see how that pans out when construction actually begins.
Now, when you look at these maps as it was in 1970, exactly, isn't there a want to model it exactly the same as well,
Yes. I mean,
without the compression and without the scaling? Because if the bridge went up at that angle, then, I mean, you did all the research. Wouldn't you like to have the bridge at that angle?
I mean, yes, my goal would
Yeah.
be to recreate as many scenes as accurately as possible. But, I don't know of any model railroad that has unlimited space. So,
I think I calculated once, if we model the railroad from running somewhere Los Angeles all the way to the East Coast, then all 3,000 miles would be divided by 87. I think something like 34 miles or some number. And I thought, well, that's a nice day trip on a moped if you need to follow your train. And maybe it will take you 3 days to follow your train across, or 5 days.
yeah.
If you, at least if you're walking along, it's going to be multiple days. So,
Yeah.
So when are we going to see this layout coming up?
That is a very excellent question. I would love to know the answer myself.
Have you at least started?
Still in the room prep stage.
Okay. Cool. Let me just quickly see if there's some more questions. Nothing on YouTube and nothing on Facebook. Well, Paul, thank you very, very much. That was quite informative. I bookmarked everything so I can also go look at it. So hope to talk to you soon. Remember, there's the breakout rooms, and Paul will go over there, I believe, if you want to ask him some direct questions.
Thanks, Speed.
Thank you. Welcome back. This is NMRAx. I'm Speed at the bottom of the helix. We have a breakout room set up for after this clinic at werby.com/Oscar Mary Rudolph George. That's OMRG. So please go over there afterwards to talk to these people that I'm going to introduce right now. Today we have two guys here, one of the three originators of the concept of teaching timetable and train order operations on a layout explicitly designed for the task. And the other gentleman is trying to make sure that the idea never stops. So you decide who's who. Please welcome John Young and Gordy Robinson.
Good afternoon.
Thanks, Speed. I think everybody kind of knows by now who I am, hopefully. So I think we're all right. All right, so how we're going to do this clinic is a little bit different from normal. We're going to do this as more of an interview. So we have John with us, who's from the Ops Roadshow team. And we're going to just ask John some questions, and John never struggles to answer. So we'll take it that way. So from the top, John, I think it's worth you explaining to folks what the Ops Roadshow actually is.
The Operation Roadshow started out as an idea to build a modular layout that we could take to the national conventions and give people the chance to learn to do operations in a very formal way. We concentrated on doing it with timetable and train order, which 25 years ago when we started this seemed to be the biggest focus in the hobby. Tony Custer wrote about it a lot. It appeared in a number of magazines, and it was a real good focus. I had the opportunity to meet Bill Jewett, who was trying to resurrect the Operation SIG at the time. He was their current dispatch office editor. We met at an operating session and had a nice discussion. And part of that discussion was he had just come away from a national convention where he had tried to teach operations on a standard double track mainline NMRA type modular layout. He ran into a number of problems with that. Mostly a layout like that is more for display than it is for operational concepts. And after that discussion, I went back to a couple of my buddies and we had a very long multi-month discussion about whether we could do this or not. And out of that grew this whole Operations Roadshow concept. We come to the national convention with the layout. It has a structured operating scheme that includes a timetable. We write train orders against that timetable. We run fast clocks. We have ways to OS, which is to report in the locations of trains. We run a dispatcher with an operator recording the train orders and distributing them around the layout. On top of that, we add an individual to each pair of operators that are with us as their pilot around the layout. So if they have some questions about how to do things or where things are, there's always somebody there to answer those questions right away. We don't just cut people loose and hope they can work their way around it. We are primarily focused on introducing new people to the operations concept, but we invite everybody who wants to come play on every one of the sessions. So that's kind of the overview of it right there.
So what year did this all start then?
I met Bill in 1997. We started building our original Operations Roadshow layout in 1998. It took us until 2003 to have it completed far enough to take it to our first showing, and that was the Toronto convention. We had an excellent reception there. We filled every session we offered. So it grew from there. We'd go to a convention every 2 to 3 years with it. We did the Cincinnati convention after that. And then I think our breakout was in Hartford in 2009. We got the biggest, warmest reception we'd had there. And that was the first convention that my wife came along as the operator. That had previously been my job. And her presence changed the nature of the people who were willing to step up and give it a try. We had possibly a dozen women that year. We had a good selection of teenagers that participated with us. it changed from being the guys who looked like me to more of the people we would really like to get coming into the hobby. Some younger people, some women who have a real interest in the modeling and want to participate with it. And it's grown from there.
And so the original Ops Roadshow layout, where is that now?
That is in one of our original 3 members' home in Saline, Michigan. At the time we started this, our plans for the layout was we'd build this thing and keep it in storage all but maybe 3 or 4 weekends a year, set it up and play with it in rented space, and then put it all back away again. Well, we got about 2 years into the project, and that member was living in basically a 1840s log cabin. And he decided that maybe it was time he built a newer house. So he took the track plan of the layout to his architect and said, build me a basement that will hold this thing, and then puts 3 bedrooms up above it. And that's what he did. So it has a permanent home right now, and we have access to his basement and the layout at any time we want to. So it's a very good system for all of us.
Fantastic. So I think we should probably just wind back a little bit, because operations for a lot of model railroaders isn't something that they do. A lot of people start in the hobby with the circle or the oval of track and the 4x8 layout and work up from there. So do you want to maybe explain a little bit about what is actual operations on a model railroad, and then also timetable and train order?
Operations can be anything from lapping trains on up. For me, I've always wanted to run the trains with some meaning. And by that, I mean the cars themselves, the freight cars, they have a destination. They've come from someplace. They're going someplace definite. And that's where we use the car card and waybills. But on top of that is the idea that every train that appears on a layout is not there for the same function. They're all moving cars for some reason, but their job is different. You've got through freights that they're just going from one major yard to another major yard that will run on the layout. They could be on the schedule itself, or they might be moving as extras. You've got passenger trains. Passenger trains are the same way. They could be just running through the layout, or they may have multiple stops. They may be a mixed train that is doing some freight movements and picking up and dropping off passengers. That is the kind of operation that we want to demonstrate. The ones that actually the trains have a definition. They have a reason to be on the layout. They have a job that they're going to do, and trying to replicate what the engineer, what the conductor, what the brakeman do with those jobs is important to the task. The top line of that is we've chosen to do it on a written schedule that shows certain trains are going to be on the layout at certain times with certain restrictions. And then on top of that, we add other trains that work by train order, and they might have different jobs they have to do. In my mind, like a local freight, that he will have the rights to go from one end of the line to the eastern yard to the western yard, but in between he will switch individual industries, and the only industries he'll move are the ones indicated on either a switch list or the car cards he has. But along with that, he has to keep in mind what the scheduled trains are that are also moving on the railroad. Any trains that he has a meet written with on a on his train order. It's the structure, and it sounds like it is a lot of knowledge and a lot of extra work, but in reality, it's a way to really bring a lot of socialization to kind of a lone wolf hobby, in that no longer are you just building a model in your basement. You're interacting with other hobbyists to create something. You know, it's not competition. It's more similar to participating in a band, in that you bring your piece of knowledge and your ability to do it and try to match it to what everybody else is doing. And that's what we're trying to teach on this layout, those particular skills.
So within the layout itself, there's timetable and train order, and also car forwarding. So the freight cars on the layout have somewhere that have a purpose. How
Right.
do you manage that?
Well, on this particular railroad, the one we're going to do in Dallas this year, one section of it is using JMRI switch lists, and we will have trains moving across the railroad that will deliver to those industries and interact that way. The rest of the railroad is going to work off a handwritten switch list, and it's going to be more of a wheel report sort of system where you'll get a train that's got maybe 20 cars in it of various types and an assignment to go to certain towns and replace one for one cars of the same type at industries in that town. The industries will be designated, and there'll be instructions of which cars you should pull from the site and replace. So using somebody else's railroads, seeing as we're using the Free-moN guys and their equipment, it wasn't really possible to do a car card and excuse me, a car card system in because it's a logistical nightmare to try to collect what freight cars 17 different guys are going to bring out of their 500 car collection and then develop waybills to go with them.
So I suppose it's worth talking. So the original Ops Roadshow layout was in HO, and it was retired in 2018 at Kansas City, and the new layout is now N scale. So what other differences are there between the old layout and the new layout?
Well,
what would be different now? So I suppose the question really is, what would be the different in terms of experience for people taking part now, as opposed to those that would have operated on the old layout?
Well, part of the difference is going to be that our knowledge of how the layout operated, the Operations Roadshow guys, was very seasoned because we've had years and years of multiple operating sessions and permutations of them. So we knew the quirks that we were going to run into in teaching it to other people. With a new, unused layout like we have now with Free-moN, it's a little bit of experimenting to us also. We're not really as familiar with what the town destinations will be. So the guys who are doing the piloting, they're going to have to focus really hard because it's not going to be natural where the next town is, what the name of it is, and that sort of thing. I think the biggest difference is the HO Operations Roadshow layout was built to have a backdrop on it, and that isolation adds a lot to the experience. You cannot look across the layout and see any other activity when you're operating with us. You know what's happening in the town or the siding you're on, but you really can't see what the next town or siding's got going on in it or multiple towns away. In the Free-moN world, that's not going to be the situation. And there's going to be a little bit of personal dedication that we're going to have to expect from the operators not to cheat and wander away and look at what's going different on the layout to make their operational decisions. You've got to look at the timetable to decide if you can make the next passing sighting to accomplish the meet you're thinking about doing. And you shouldn't make that decision by looking to see where the passenger train is across the room. So I think that's the biggest difference between the two of them, that and the car forwarding. We are very dedicated using car cards and waybills on the Operation Roadshow, and we have a lot of different permutations of them and interesting ways to do it that we just can't apply in this particular system.
Okay, so how big was because we'll show in a little minute, we'll show the layout for Dallas, but how big was the old layout to give people an idea of the difference of scale now?
The HO size layout was 24 feet wide and 53 feet long. It was created in a big noodle W shape. Mainline run on it was 400 feet. It had 8 passing sidings to it, 8 distinct little towns that we modeled. The end scale is going to be 320 feet of mainline. Once again, it's going to have 8 passing sidings, but I think this is going to be an even more interesting layout to operate on because it's got some dedicated switching areas that will be off the main line that we can route trains into and out of and give those people a chance to do some car movement operations that they didn't really get to experiment with the original HO layout. In particular, Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Gordy.
No, keep going.
I was going to say, in particular, is going to be the corner that has the JMRI Industries. It's got 2 yards and a lot of different industrial areas in it. So that's going to be a pretty heavy duty corner of the layout to be assigned to for this.
So 320 feet is smaller, but 320 feet in N scale is just under 10 miles of main line to run on. That's a lot more than the HO layout.
The HO was 6.7 miles.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So for those that have been to an Ops Roadshow clinic before or operating session before, it's going to be a different experience. It's not going to be the same, but I guess there's a different thing to experience, and people that have not operated with N scale before, it's going to be different. We've made some adaptations so that it's not so impactful. If you can't read the numbers on the side of the car, it doesn't matter.
Right.
But ultimately, it's effectively a bigger layout that you're getting to operate on. So there may well be more operators potentially and available or able to operate on an N scale layout. So okay, cool.
On the original Operation Roadshow, we would utilize 6 2-person operating crews, and they would each have a pilot with them. On this layout, after the first session, we're going to see if we can handle 8 crews of 2 people apiece. We think the potential is there. It comes down to what the dispatcher can handle. Once you get past 4 moving trains, things get really confusing for the dispatcher. And if there's a potential of having 8 moving trains on this railroad at one time, that could be a little bit of mental gymnastics. So we're going to do a little experimenting.
So that's 8 crews moving over the layout, and also the people operating the area on. So the industrial areas in addition to that as well.
Yeah.
So okay.
So
cool. It's going to be very busy. All right. So for those that have never done an Ops Roadshow clinic before, could you talk us through what their experience would be? We talked about a lot of things that go on, but let's talk through what the start to the end of a session looks like.
Well, we start out with about a 15-minute talk where we discuss what a timetable looks like, what the items in it are that you need to recognize and be able to understand. You're going to do this with a timetable in your hand. We distribute them to the people, and they've got them to hold on to. After we have that discussion, we'll talk about how you OS in your train. That's report when you get to a station. We don't use telephones on this layout. We actually use your cell phone to text our dispatcher. So we'll have to get you set up to do that. And then we'll talk about some basic rules of operation, how to interpret what a train order is telling you. You have to look at who the train order is addressed to, see how much detail there is. A simple train order tells you that your train is going to go from one starting point to the finishing point. It will be the far ends of the layout, but it could also list who you're going to have to meet along the way. And those are including the address. You may get a train order that you're not the main addressee in it, and you'll have to do some interpretation of it. Once we cover those things over that 15 minutes, our operator, Cindy, will come around and she will do the crew assignments. Now, if you come with a buddy, she may or may not leave you with your buddy. Depends on what each of your individual abilities are and how you want to experience what the layout is. A lot of guys come as friends, and after talking to her, we break them up and we put them in 2 different teams because that gives them a different experience and that they can share later. She will assign you to a job. We'll get everybody in place with a pilot, and then we'll start the clocks. Then the session itself overall will run 3 hours. And over those 3 hours, you will operate that train. You will react to the schedule and the passenger trains moving against you and that sort of thing. Try not to have anybody get killed on the line. We don't like to have cornfield meets. So that's what it will amount to. It's a big board game. We like to have fun with it. through the thing. We don't try to embarrass anybody. We don't have got yous or anything like that. There will be times though that you might see a bunch of guys in blue shirts with my emblem on it come over and be gawking at you because we've realized that you haven't understood something quite the way you should have. And maybe it's time to stop and rethink what you were planning to do. But beyond that, it's just a very comfortable pace way to get your feet wet in what operations are like. And it's, train activity in 3 hours is more than likely you'll get 3 trains to run. I'm saying that with my experience on the HO layout. This one's long enough that maybe possibly it'd only be 2 trains, but we try to keep everybody who has come to the session active all the time and running trains.
That's cool, and it definitely is a good introduction to operations in a safe space. There's no expectation. Everybody, no matter what their experience is, you come with 0 expectation. So,
right.
All right, cool. Well, should we have a look at this layout? I feel like as El Presidente, I should have some kind of curtain rolling back. But if Brad is ready, we will talk you through this layout. Unfortunately for y'all, it's going to be me talking you through this, not the Free-moN guys. So what are you looking at? So we're going to zoom in. So you're looking at the entire layout here. To give you an idea of size, it's from top to bottom, it's 54 feet in a 68 feet area, and from left to right, it's 71, or just under 72 feet from left to right. So what we're going to do is we'll zoom in and we'll look at how this works. But it's and overall, before we zoom in, you'll see that there's turnbacks to restage the trains effectively. There's yards where it says John there, and there's a yard where it says Robert there. And so trains will move from one place to another, and there's another big yard that says speed next to it here. But we'll zoom in and walk through it so you can get to see the level of detail that's in here and just how many industries there are. So probably the best place to start, I might have zoomed in a bit too much here, but we'll start here with the loop here. So this is I believe that this end here has industries, grain-related industries on it. It's got an ethanol plant, and the main line then moves through the first yard here. More industries.
The yard labeled Robert is going to be used as a staging yard. So there will be the let's see which way we're going on this. The west or eastbound trains are going to originate in Robert Yard, and they will follow the operators themselves will be in the aisle between Robert and Jeremy there and follow their trains all the way around from there.
This side over here. I haven't got a pen. Unfortunately, I don't think I can get one either. Okay, and so the train will then come around into our first town, which is Holstead, and then we'll move through into our second passing side in, and then there's a branch line here, so you may well end up operating up the branch. Branch lines are a nice place to be because generally passenger trains don't come and interrupt you. And then we'll move around, and you'll be always operating on the outside. That's right, or you'll be on the inside.
No, you'll always be on the outside. What that does for you, you can keep track of which way is east and west all the time. It doesn't flip-flop back and forth on you.
Okay, and so the train will then come back around, running through more industries. I suppose it's worth saying here that people will notice that just like the real railroad, just because there's an industry doesn't mean there's a run round track. So certain industries are served depending on the direction that the train is traveling.
Exactly.
We then come into an absolutely huge passing siding. And then we now move around. Go ahead.
That long passing siding might actually get defined in the timetable as double track main line. which is a different set of operating rules than what single track with passing sidings are. I haven't written the timetable yet, so that might show up.
That would be really interesting. And then we come round into another town.
Yep.
And I can't just find where the note is on that one. But there's lots of industry there. There's a small classification yard as well. We come around, and then we come into Speed's yard,
right?
Which is right
that
in the
should be
middle
the
of the
main
layout.
classification yard on the layout. And we're going to attempt to try to build some of the trains there for the op sessions. That may be one crew in itself.
Okay, so there's a yard for people to work. So if you like working yards, and on the outside, so this is interesting. So it's double track on the other side of Speed's yard, with a series of crossovers, and then we come into David's modules, which I believe is a terminal passenger station.
Terminal. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your passenger trains will be originating and returning to this point.
Right.
Okay. And then so the passenger trains will also need to be turned on the Y, I guess.
Right.
To restage. So that'll be interesting. Then we come around here where we have this bump out corner. Another few industries. That's a grain. I think that's a grain elevator. Yeah, it's a grain elevator on Jeremy's modules. And then we come around into another town that's made up by Ron and Jeremy's modules. And again, we've got industries off in all different directions. That's an interchange. So we'll be able to model an interchange with another railroad. And then we come into another small town with another industry. I think that was a feed, Foster's Farms. I'm guessing that's a grain elevator and a feed mill. And then we come into another small town with a passenger station. And it's got some team tracks coming off it. We come around, we go through one of my modules, which is another railroad that's crossing over, but for this time it doesn't interchange. It's just something to be aware of. And then we come into Greg's modules. So it's worth talking. I'm just trying to get Greg's modules in. So earlier you heard us talk about the area of the layout that's going to be an industrial area that operates on its own with its own switch lists. And this is Greg's modules. So you'll see that there's a set of yards, top and bottom, and we may we may have trains that stop into these yards, but if you're the crew that's operating Greg's modules, you're going to be picking up cars from one of these two yards, and you're going to work for this railroad that is here, and you're going to switch all this industrial district. There's lots and lots of industries on Greg's modules that need you to go and drop off cars and pick up cars. So there's so much, in fact, that it's going to take an entire operating session, I think, for you to complete the work that's there, just staying in one place. If you like switching or you're not very mobile, we've got some jobs that are quite static, whether that's being in Speed's yard, breaking down and making up trains, or whether that's up here on Greg's bit, switching out the industrial district. And then we've also got another branch line here that comes to Jim's module, which has got a engine facility, a locomotive facility. So we may well be moving some motive power backwards and forwards as well, I guess, John.
Yep.
Change out the motive power.
Yeah.
And then we come around to the other yard, which is your yard.
Yep.
And then through another one of Gordy's modules and into Dwight's modules, which I think Dwight's modules come up and it climbs up and comes back down again. There's a gradient in there.
Yeah, I think it's got a coal mine involved in it. So that probably is going to be a destination for a train itself to service that mine area.
Cool, because there will be a team track of sorts on that module of mine. So there'll be a couple of industries down below that yard. So it's going to be quite big. So we'll zoom back out and show you where we've ended up, because we kind of went all the way around. So, oops, this is quite a big layout. I'm sure there's some comments right now on YouTube going, "That's huge," but you got to remember that this is N scale as well. So with it being N scale, we can squeeze a lot of module a lot into a module. In the same space you would have in HO, we can fit a lot more. So you can expect to have the ability to have longer trains. Whether we will or not will depend on the available stock, but you could expect longer trains. You can expect longer runs between towns as well. But this will be completely open. And so as well, it's worth to say, John, that as long as people don't get in the way of what the operators are doing, the public will be able to view the layout. And
we invite them to come in.
What's happening.
Yes. Yeah. When we initially started this, we thought that was going to be a problem, but we found out with the Wabash layout that it actually wasn't. The people were very respectful of what we were doing and seemed to stay out of the way of the operators and just enjoyed the show, to tell you the truth. It's fun to watch other people switch. So, yeah, we just let people come through. And we'll do the same with this. There's going to be other modular layouts in this same room. So it's pretty much going to be a collection point for people viewing model railroads for the week.
And so all the way
one thing I
around
should
the
point out-
outside, people will be able to walk all the way around the outside of this layout and watch what's going on. Yeah, John.
What I was going to point out is timetable and train order is an anachronistic operating system. There really wasn't any use of it after about 1980 in the United States. And it had pretty much died out by the early 1960s. On this particular railroad, even though we're going to use it, the equipment you're going to see is much more modern. It is going to be equipment that replicates what exists in the 80s or the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s. And but we're going to lay it anyway and just make believe that that time shift didn't happen. All these trains will have cabooses, which obviously is not appropriate for the 1990s era, but we're going to do that because it helps to define the train and have the operators keep track, make sure they got all their equipment with them.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so we'll stop sharing there and we'll go back to a few more questions, and then we'll give the people the chance that are listening to our little chat to have their questions answered. So if you have got questions for me or John about the layout, about Free-moN, about the Ops Roadshow, about the Operation Special Interest Group, or where you can find more information, etc., then keep putting them in the chat as we go along, and we'll have some time in a wee while to answer your own questions and get this a bit more interactive. So this is going to be at Dallas, and it's going to run from Monday morning through to Thursday evening, and then it will need to be broken down because it will be the national train show on Friday morning. And there's a huge crew of people. There's the ops guys, there's John's team, as John speaks about his team. There's also going to be the Free-moN community, and I know that there's guys bringing modules in from Oregon and other parts of North America. I'm flying, hopefully, unless somebody destroys or loses my bag. I'll be bringing some modules with me over across the pond. You note that Gordy's bits are not important to the layout, and if the layout shrinks by 4 feet, no one will mind. But hopefully Gordy's modules don't get destroyed in transit. So when we're at the actual show, when will people be able to sign up to take part?
You'll be able to start signing up Sunday evening, roughly 4 o'clock. My wife, Cindy, who's our operator, handles signing people up. And basically, you're going to be requested to sign up for a specific session and leave your phone number with us. And we will give you a card also so that you can contact Cindy again. And we do this because there's people that, for one reason or another, they can't make a session after they sign up for it. And rather than have just nobody in the session, we'd prefer you call us because pretty much we have standby people who come by the layout each session just on the chance there'll be an open spot they can participate with. So that's when it starts. She will take signups all the rest of the time that we are operating on the layout. We prefer to do it between sessions if we can, because she's busy doing other things during the sessions. But there will be openings for the entire week. We don't fill everything on Sunday and Monday. We hold a few sessions open for Wednesday and Thursday, so they remain available to people come to the convention later.
All right, so that would be great. And so I think we've covered everything. I'm sure there'll be some questions, but we've got 5 minutes to keep talking before we answer the other questions. So how is it? So originally it was just your small group. You had the layout, you maintained the layout. You didn't go to every single national trade show, but you went every couple of years for a long time. And but it was the same. Now you're working with different people, because I may be pushing that. And and how has it been? How has it been working with the Free-moN community?
There's a bit of irony to this whole thing, because we had just planned not to do this anymore on a national level. And for the St. Louis convention, about 10 weeks before convention, I monitor the Free-moN lists simply because I'm interested in what those people do. And all of a sudden I see this thing pop up, driven by some guy who's the president of the organization I hadn't heard of before, to have an Operations Roadshow style setup at the St. Louis convention. So I got a hold of Jeremy Jensen, who was heading up the Free-moN guys, and just to see what he had planned and what he knew what to do. And they needed a little help. So I talked to my buddies, and we stepped up and offered to do a little paperwork for them and a few other instructional things. And as the weeks went on, we discovered we were back in the Operations Roadshow business on the national level again. Working with the Free-moN guys has been an excellent experience on my part. These guys have been enthusiastic about doing this. They have caught on to what we're trying to teach really quickly. For the most part, they are going to be our pilots on the layout. Now, some of the guys have experience with timetable and train order. A lot of the guys don't. And we're going to have a session just for them on Monday morning to help them understand what's going to happen the rest of the week. My expectations is they're going to really know what they're doing by Tuesday morning. The guys get it, and we like working with them. It gives them a very different way to interact with people at a convention. Displaying a layout is one thing. Having somebody else hold the throttle in their hand and run a train across your models, that's a different experience. It gives you a chance to interact with the people and talk to them, explain what you were trying to do, how you accomplished it. In certain ways, this is a lot like the RPM experience, where you're not competing with anybody, but it gives you a reason to interact with people you may not have ever got a chance to talk to before. So I have nothing but good things to say about working with the Free-moN guys.
No, that's awesome, and I know they've enjoyed it as well. And it, it's given an opportunity for N-Scale particularly to be present at the NMRA convention, where we do get some jibes in the past from the N-Scale community that the NMRA is not for them. But the clues in the name. N is our most important letter at the moment of our association's name, so it's right at the front. So we're all for N-Scale. Okay, cool. So I think we've pretty much covered all of the questions that I had. I think we'll move on if we can. Hopefully, Speed's got some questions from the people that are watching, and we can move on to those.
So first one, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
What is Free-moN?
Go ahead, Gordy.
I'll answer that. So Free-moN is a modular standard. It's part of the family of modular standards for N-Scale, but Free-moN is a worldwide standard. And if you want to see what the standards are, there's a website, freemon.net, which has all the standards on. The biggest difference between traditional N-Scale modular standards like T-Track or N-Track is that there's no backseam. It's code 55 rail. It's centered single track modules generally. They don't have to be, but most of the modules are single track. The aim and objective for Free-moN is to replicate the prototype as closely as possible. So the modules have a sort of standard approach to scenery, as well as a standard approach to the actual construction. And it's really more around having a more prototypical modular layout. But there's Free-moN modelers all over the world. There's huge meets in Europe. There are ever-increasing meets in the United States in both HO and N-Scale. But Free-moN is the N-scale variety of Free-moN. We could talk more about Free-moN on another clinic. I think we've got Free-moN coming to talk to us in a future NMRAx. And also, if you go back to last month's NMRAx, I think it was April's, there's a clinic by me about 3D printing some Free-moN modules, and we talk more about what the standards are and what they look like. So if you go on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see some more information.
Okay, there was a few questions which you did answer, but let's just ask them again. How long are these operating sessions? Where can I sign up for them, and when?
Okay, the operating sessions are 3 hours long. The first public one will be at 2 p.m. on Monday. The second one will be 7 p.m. And then the next 3 days of the week, they'll be at 9 a.m., 2 p.m., and 7 p.m. each day. And as I stated, you sign up at the layout itself. There's no pre-registration, but the registrations will start about dinner time on Sunday and continue on from then.
Okay. Any guess how many cars would be on the layout?
Well, the HO layout that's only 2/3 of what this one is has a fleet of roughly 700 cars, and 400 of them on the layout at the same time. So I would guess that the layout itself is going to have somewhere upwards of 750 cars on it at any given time.
And any guess how many cars I might need to move during a operating session?
Well, the trains themselves would be roughly 20 cars a piece. One train moving. If you get a switching job, then you're going to move the 20 cars into industries and 20 cars out. You'll probably, if you get one of those jobs, it'd be the only one you run during the day. If you're just moving a train across the layout, my anticipation would be you're going to get 3 of those trains, so you'll be moving 60 cars during the session.
So there would be through trains or passenger trains or unit trains?
Yes, all of those.
But you've got to remember that exact scale, this layout is nearly 10 miles long, end to end. And so it's going to take a long time if you're running a train from one end to the other, a lot longer than you would normally expect. For those not familiar with N scale, every 33 feet of an N scale layout represents a scale mile. So when we're talking 20 car trains, they're going to look tiny on this layout. So yeah, there's going to be somewhere between 700 and 1,000 cars, I think, and you're going to be getting tired. It's going to be a long walk to go around this layout.
But don't worry about that too much, because we stage chairs all over the place. We know, well, our typical person is 65 to 75 years old. They're not going to stand on their feet for 3 hours to do this. They'll need a break from it, and we accommodate for that. One other thing in reference to how long it is and how long it takes to get over the layout, the Operations Roadshow guys insist that the trains be run slow. Yes, an engine in a car can go 70 miles an hour or 60 miles an hour. In actual railroad use, those cars or those trains are few and far between. So most of the trains on this railroad will run something in the 30-mile-an-hour range. And that helps extend the main line for us. It gives the guys doing the OSing and other decision-making time to make those decisions. So a trip over this layout is going to take you real time to do. It's not a 15-minute trip. It's more than likely going to be 45 minutes to an hour.
So now that you've mentioned age, will I need an optivisor to read the car numbers?
There will be no need to read car numbers, as far as I know, outside of the piece of Greg's that has the switch lists from JMRI. So,
cool.
But the JMRI switch lists will tell you the railroad of the car, the color of the car, and the type of the car. So if there's only one Southern Railway box car, you don't need to read the numbers.
Good.
So.
And we're not going to nitpick so bad if you get the wrong Southern Railroad car in that spot.
So who supplies all these engines and cars?
The module owners themselves. We've had a very interesting discussion as we go into this. about what fleet pieces individuals are bringing. So it is going to be interesting. They're going to try to keep it all within a southwestern theme of what equipment is on the layout, which is very appropriate, and we haven't seemed to have any problems getting enough equipment to do it. In fact, it might come down to making time to run somebody's special train. So
Would you allow people to bring their own equipment?
absolutely not.
Okay.
We don't want to risk intermixing people's equipment. We have to be in complete control of decoder functions and stuff like that. We don't want to introduce some stray piece into the system.
Okay, so now that you led into that, how do we control these trains?
Radio DCC, the standard for Free-moN is a Digitrack system. The owners of the modules are bringing their own personal throttles for the people participating to use. So we really would hope they're respectful of these very expensive little piece of electronics. But yes, that's how it's going to happen. I think the decision's been made not to implement Wi-Fi on this particular layout. Apparently, Free-moN has had a bit of trouble with that in the past. And since each of the modules are wired for the local net system, they are not going to use Wi-Fi. They're going to simply use the radio systems this time.
And people have got to remember that this layout will never have come together before the Sunday night, before the op sessions start on Monday. And some of these modules have never been in the same room before. So it's going to be, it's a challenge. It's a real challenge.
Yeah.
Okay, so how long does it take to set this up and tear it back down?
We don't know. We've never done it. We don't know. We've never set this layout up before. But they've got Sunday to do it, and they've got Thursday, Friday to tear it down. It's basically, that's how it's going to be. If you want to volunteer to help, carry things in and set things up on Sunday, you're very welcome to. People are very, very welcome to come and let us know beforehand, ideally, so we know who you are, because there's some very expensive bits of kit in this setup. But if people want to learn about Free-moN and setting up Free-moN layouts and want to actually help carry things and move and carry and help set up and take down, I don't think anyone would say no. It'd just be good to know that people are doing that in advance.
That was actually the very last part of the question: is do you have a volunteer crew? And I kind of hope that they were asking if they could help.
Yes, they've definitely
get in touch.
Yeah. Now we have a layout master, Lee Calkins. I don't know if he's on this video today, but if you can track him down through the Free-moN group, he is one of the leaders in N-Scale itself. He's a board member and stuff like that. But he's going to be our layout master in charge of the setup and the teardown. I think he's also taken on the duties of making the electronics work the way they need to do. If you'd like to volunteer and make your presence known ahead of time, he's the man to reach out to. He could tell you who we need and what we need and when. But I can tell you from the experience we had with the HO layout, we'd show up with a dozen people, and normally we'd have a few volunteers from the local committee. The fastest we ever set that layout and had it operational was 6 hours, and that was in Hartford, Connecticut. We had 6 local volunteers that were longtime module display people, and they taught us things about setting up the layout we had never envisioned before. The worst was actually at Kansas City. Even though we had a lot of volunteer help, the layout had become so complex, and we'd honestly gotten so old, that setup took us 17 hours. And it really confirmed that we had to quit. I am so thankful to the Free-moN guys, because that last, the Kansas City convention, I was so exhausted by the end of Sunday, I was pretty much wasted for the next 2 days. It really was. And with Free-moN, it's a lot more fun for the Ops Roadshow guys to come in and see this beautiful layout and distribute some paperwork and hang a few train order signals and say, let's run trains, than it is to spend a day, literally a day, setting up a modules. So
I think it's worth saying as well that the planning for the Free-moN guys for this started about the second day of St. Louis convention last year. It's not something that takes 5 minutes to throw together. The call for modules closed about Christmas, and we spent the last 5 months putting together the layout plan, confirming industries, confirming who's bringing what freight cars. We're still working through all that now. People are still building modules for this and modifying modules. Yeah, you guys as well. So yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. And hopefully as well, I think we've got national conventions lined up for the next 2 years. Bit of a plug if anyone wants to volunteer for 26, 27 to host a national convention in your city or town, then please tell me sooner rather than later. But I'm not sure we're going to be able to replicate the layout in Long Beach because there's a huge Free-moN event a few weeks before that convention next year. That's been long standing, but certainly we'll be in Detroit. We'll definitely have a layout again in Detroit. So we're hoping to have it though in Long Beach, and we're trying to work with the modular group out there. So it's good.
Next question. Could people watch over the dispatcher's shoulders and learn something?
Yes, absolutely. So keep in mind you're watching over the shoulder of a guy who's trying to do some heavy duty thinking. So if he can answer questions is really going to be dependent on what's going on at the time. But Jeff is our primary dispatcher for these setups. I'm the secondary guy. We're more than happy to explain things to you. The logic we use to move trains, how the train orders are written, how we rely on the timetable. We'll discuss that with you. But just be respectful of what he's trying to do at the time.
So with the timetable and train order and the dispatcher, there's no signals on the layout?
The only signals that exist on the layout are basically ornamental. There's a modular signaling system that basically it's an ABS system that just drops, offers a green and drops a red when the train comes through, but it's not a control system.
Cool. So that was really insightful. We have one last question before we say goodbye. Gordy, will there be any donuts hidden under the layout?
Who knows? Who knows?
So with that, thank you, Gordy. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Can't wait to see you in Grapevine in August.
Yes.
We'll be in the breakout rooms.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, breakout rooms at wearby.com/OMRG. Oscar, Mary, Rudolph, George.
Okay. See you there.
Welcome back. This is NMRAx, the May 27th update of 2023. I'm Speed at the bottom of the helix. First, I want to tell you about the breakout rooms that's ongoing right now at whereby.com/OMRG. That's Oscar, Mary, Rudolph, George. Brad will try to put that link in the chat again. So please go over there after this if you have questions for the clinician. Or have questions to the current the clinicians that's right there right now, Gordy and John Young. Our next clinician is a graduate student at Penn State in molecular astrobiology and an exuberantly avid traveler who's been to 49 states. We'll ask later which ones he's missing. Possibly the first openly trans non-binary model railroader, and they are uncontrollably passionate about bridging generation divides to ensure the future of model railroading. Please welcome G4.
Thank you so much, Speed. All right. Well, I am here to talk to you all today about, I think the title is pretty self-explanatory. Proto-Freelancing in the Wrong Direction, my accidental quest to model the near future. I think this title might possibly be the coolest thing I can ever bring into this world. All right, so to those who don't know, this is part 3 in what I'm calling my modern modeling anthology. Part 1 was modeling modern transit systems, where I introduced the subject of modern transit and show how it relates to regular model railroading topics. Then in part 2, I zoom in on the technology of diesel multiple unit hybrid light rail to show how that can be brought to layouts and demonstrate operating schemes. And then part 3 is this one, where I kind of wrap everything all up together. All right, so let's start with a brief outline of this presentation. The idea lightning bolted itself into my head one day, and I was so consumed by it that I had no choice but to take a day off from lab and just write up this slide. And then I broke it out to a 1 bullet point per slide, added pictures, and well, this presentation is what follows. All right, a much more realistic assessment of what it is we're going to be going over today. First, I want to highlight state-supported Amtrak corridors as having had the largest ridership growth of any Amtrak system, and also how it's the most competitive against cars and planes. I want to demonstrate the feasibility of modeling the near future using State Department of Transportation document archives. I also want to inspire you to find future passenger rail corridors, either for building layouts or for bringing to your real-world communities. And finally, I want to share my long, slow slide into insanity, and hopefully we can laugh at my misfortune along the way. All right, let's begin with my personal history of passenger trains. I had a wretchedly suburban childhood in Central and South Florida and northern Utah that you can see right here. These communities are vast, empty, soulless, and uncharismatic in every dimension. Truly a horrible place to grow up. But in 2012, I became an undergrad at the University of Washington in Seattle. And to people who know Seattle, it has the Link Light Rail, and I like choo-choos. So I went massively far out of my way at every opportunity just to ride on the trains. But this actually introduced me to the subject of public transit, and especially the Seattle Transit blog really taught me a lot of what I know about transit, and so I learned a lot along the way while I was there. Also, to anybody who knows anything about the Pacific Northwest, there is Amtrak Cascades, which is a 1990s state-supported consolidation of a bunch of discoordinated name trains running between Seattle and Portland. They got up to 10 round trips a day between the two in the pre-pandemic times, and 2 each in either direction extended north to Vancouver, BC, and south to Eugene, Oregon. And there are plans to bring them back up to 13 trains a day. But the thing that everybody really knows about them are their extremely charismatic talgos. But overall, Cascades is loved by modelers and rail fans alike. It has big cities, small towns, modern architecture, dramatic scenes, and simply gorgeous scenery. I mean, seriously, look at this. What is not to love? It's fantastic. But let's take a moment to pause and ask, what is a talgo? Well, contrary to intuition, the limiting factor of passenger train speed is actually passenger comfort. You can, with existing track and passenger cars, go at much higher speeds, but the passengers are going to be plastered to one side of the wall or the other whenever the train goes around the car, around a curve. So not very practical. So instead, you can resolve this either by super elevating the track, physically tilting it like you see on highways, or you can tilt the train itself. You can do this with active tilting, which involves computer systems and hydraulics that physically tilt the train as it goes around a corner, or you can have passively tilting trains, which use the geometry of the pistons to put the axis of rotation of the car body floating in empty space above the car, which means that whenever the car goes around a curve, it just naturally swings out in perfect proportion to the lateral forces. And this also is a much simpler and lower maintenance means of getting tilting trains. And specifically, Talgos are a Spanish brand of a passively tilting married train set system. And with these passively tilting train sets, WSDOT has been able to eke out an extra 15-mile-an-hour speed limit on existing track without any modifications. So it's a very practicable way to bring higher speed rail to various corridors. Now, another thing that's important about Cascades is simply that the passenger cars are part of a married train set. Now, this is more efficient. It means you don't need to turn or switch the train at its destination, but it's also bidirectional because it has F40 PH units, which had their prime movers gutted and then replaced with a roll side door on the side to turn it into a baggage compartment, and the fuel compartment was filled with concrete to weight it down, but critically, the control stand was left intact at the front of the locomotive, allowing you to control the actual locomotive on the opposite side of the train. This effectively makes the entire train set truly bidirectional. And the combination of cab baggage unit means that they're amusingly called cabbages. I love that. But also the train set itself is much better branded and unique to the region. Instead of the soulless stainless steel amphiletes, you have a paint scheme of quote-unquote evergreen, espresso, and cream. I can imagine nothing more Pacific Northwestern-y than that. But it's also modern and sleek. You no longer have any blunt ends like you do in regular passenger trains. It looks like it's supposed to be going in both directions. And this is opposed to things that you can see like this, where there is just an uncoordinated mishmash of passenger cars with each other, and then hard edges going from passenger cars to locomotive. I do not think that this looks very sleek and modern. So anyway, as you can probably infer, with the new Charger locomotives from Siemens, the Surfliner Chargers, which have a spoiler bringing the locomotive up to the level of the Superliner cars, gets the G4 seal of approval for modern and sleek. But on the other hand, the Amtrak Midwest Chargers, which mismatch their paint scheme to the new passenger cars, does not get the G4 seal of approval of modern and sleek. Anyway, the point I want to make here is that more places should have modern, sleek train sets. But going back to my personal history, there was one very memorable experience. I was waiting at Olympia Lacey Station. I needed to go north back to Seattle in order to make it back in time for a philosophy class, but the train was 1 hour and 15 minutes behind schedule, which was a problem because I was going to miss the philosophy class. But then all of a sudden, things started happening. It was a double-track main line, and on both sides, there was a train that approached from the south and the north, but they stopped short of the station, and critically, they stopped short of 2 crossovers. And then I saw Cascades coming around the corner, but it was on the wrong track. That did not actually serve the station platform. But then all of a sudden the train came along, it took the crossover, got to the other track, picked us up at the station, took the other crossover, and then proceeded north. Ultimately, we were able to cut the delay in half, and I made it to my philosophy class in time. But importantly, this taught me 2 things. First off, that the Centralia South dispatcher is a dick who hates passenger trains. I don't care if there was track work in Kelso Longview. It's an ongoing problem. But anyway, it also taught me firsthand how passenger trains fit into the broader railroading ecosystem. There was a person who was in Fort Worth who saw that the passenger train was behind schedule and took control over the freight trains in order to give the passenger train, first off, access to the station platform and also bring it back north to Seattle, making up most of its delay. And so since that point, I have taken a ton of different Amtrak explorations. I've taken 33 individual trips across 17 different routes for a grand total of 16,000 miles and 26,000 kilometers. And hopefully soon I will be able to finish filling in this map eventually. Now, let's step out for a second and consider, why are intercity short-haul passenger trains important? Well, of course, everybody knows of the Northeast Corridor, and the reason that makes this work is that because of the Northeast megalopolis, or as I like to describe it, a diarrhea of humanity streaked along the underpants of Mother Nature. But you have so many major cities in such close proximity to each other that their suburbs basically blend into each other. And because of this, taking the train is actually time competitive with taking a plane. But this it also works in other areas of the country as well, even though most people don't know it. And these are the so-called state-supported corridors. Obviously, Amtrak Cascades is one of them, but you also have the Empire Service in New York State. It goes north from New York to Albany, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo. You have Amtrak California, which has 3 different routes, kind of 2 in Northern California and 1 in Southern California. And then you have 5 different routes, or 5 different systems, excuse me, 4 different systems in the Midwest, because Indiana is awful, mostly in the Illinois and Michigan area. But the thing that makes a state-supported corridor is that it's under 750 miles and 12 hours end-to-end, which means that you can usually have multiple trips a day. But critically, this allows for same-day round trips. So it means that people can get on the train at any station along the route and then go to the big city to do their business or have a day, and then also critically board the train and go back home the same night, such that they don't have to shell out for an expensive hotel room, which is something that a lot of people can't necessarily afford. Same thing as Cascades, the state-supported corridors have all seen a growth in consolidation since the 1990s. And interestingly, they're usually, but not always, interlined with long-distance trains. The idea being that the stations already exist, so you may as well up-level service, but also the long-distance trains are going to run whether or not the state-supported corridors do, so you can basically use them as a bonus round trip. And usually the schedules are coordinated for that purpose. Now, I was taught specifically the importance of state-supported corridors when I lived in New York, and I needed to get to a friend in Kalamazoo, Michigan. But the problem was a direct flight would have cost a whopping $515. But what I ultimately ended up doing is I flew from New York to Chicago, a much larger and more major airport. I took the Blue Water to Kalamazoo, saw my friend. I took the Wolverine from Kalamazoo to Detroit, and then I flew back to New York. And the grand total of this journey was $240, less than half the cost of a direct flight. And then on top of that, I got bonus days in Chicago and Detroit to explore. And so this showed me the reason why this works is that trains can stop basically anywhere along their route for nary more than the cost of a step box and a patch of asphalt, whereas planes work best with major pair destinations. And so as a result, passenger trains are an absolutely vital link for the economies of midi and micropolitan cities. And so as a result of this, they fit best in the corridors of too short to fly, too long to drive. And if you compare a map of Amtrak's ridership with a map of the state-supported corridors, you can see pretty unequivocally that the highest ridership stations are the ones that see multiple departures every day. And because of this, the state-supported corridors have had the most growth of any category of Amtrak route in the past 30 years. I want to say this again. The state-supported corridors have grown faster than the Northeast corridor in terms of importance and ridership. And one reason for this is that obviously younger generations are disproportionately more interested in eco-friendly ways to travel, and so as a result, they are more likely to take trains. And in fact, younger generations, I think, actually have lower rates of driver's licensing than any time since the 1940s. So a lot of the younger generations are specifically starting to prefer train travel. And while I was exploring all of this, I managed to go to the 2017 rollout of the Siemens charger units for WashDOT at King Street Station, and I got to witness firsthand the evolution of passenger railroading in front of me. Oh, and I was also witnessed by a YouTuber. Look at baby me, I'm so dorky. But I also, I wanted to, learning all of this, do some civic engagement. And skipping over a lot of steps, I'm actually the dictator of my own micronation. I seceded from the country, and I'm going to build a wall and make America pay for it. Long story. But in 2021, when the neighboring nation got new heads of state, I decided to send them a letter of congratulations, you know, because I am of completely equal importance to the world as Biden and Harris. So I spent about a single paragraph congratulating them, and then maybe about 7 pages extolling the benefits of modern intercity trains and light rail. And you can see here that I actually highlighted a bunch of different corridors that were worth investigating. And lo and behold, a little bit later, Amtrak released its Connect Us map, which actually had a lot of the corridors that I myself highlighted. Now, is it likely that I am single-handedly responsible for the largest expansion of passenger rail infrastructure in American history? No. Am I going to say that I am anyway? You betcha. But this all meant that the state-supported corridors and the short-haul passenger routes were finally getting their due. Amtrak Midwest was getting their new Charger locomotives and venture cars. Brightline was going gangbusters in Florida. And then also the Connect Us map specifically highlighted all of these short-haul intercity routes. And I became enamored with this, and I wanted to find more information. So I discovered this enterprising young YouTuber named Worldwide Rail Fan, who decided for the hell of it one day just to email Amtrak PR to see what they were doing with Amtrak expansions. And Amtrak PR responded, "Oh my goodness, we're so thankful somebody actually cares about us. Here, have all of the information." And so he ended up breaking a lot of major stories, and this eventually became a yearly phenomenon, American High-Speed Rail Week. I cannot recommend it enough. It's fantastic. So in the first year, he discussed the new venture car order for Amtrak Midwest. He broke the new Phase 7 paint scheme before I think any other outlet had. And he also found a concept art for a Siemens venture car train set. Ah! Okay, calm down, G4. In the second year, he discussed some of the plans for the train set, how they're going to be going to the Northeast Corridor, Caltrans, and also Amtrak Cascades. And they have cab units like the cabbages, but cooler. And also he announced how the new chargers will actually be forward compatible with electrification. The new train sets will have pantographs on some of their coaches, and then a plug that the diesel locomotive can plug into the train set to effectively make it an electric locomotive. And also they're going to investigate battery options for use on the Empire Corridor as well, which is just absolutely fascinating. A battery-powered train. But I'm still a regular modeler. I swear. I just like transit advocacy. Right? Oh, all right. But the idea then begins. When I lived in New York, it absolutely sucks, except for trains. It's an otherwise awful place to live, but I made the best of a bad situation, and, well, I took a lot of trains. But while I was there, I was stuck with this one very important question. Why do the trolleys in the Northeast suck so badly? You can see here, this is something that I grew up with in Seattle. It's sleek, it's new, it's modern. And down here in Philadelphia, it's a toaster from the 1980s. What I described next is that I basically fell into a Wikipedia hole, broke my leg, and couldn't climb out. And I ended up effectively memorizing the modern transit landscape. Side note, I want to shout out Trains, Buses, People, an Opinionated Atlas of North American Transit. I cannot recommend it enough. It's a fantastic book. I actually think it's literally a textbook, but it's the first textbook that I've read that's a page turner. I absolutely loved it, and I recommend it highly. But I was completely subsumed by my knowledge to the point that it was negatively affecting my modeling. So I just had to get it out somehow. So I made a presentation, Modeling Modern Transit Systems. You may have heard of it about 18 minutes ago. So I basically taught myself urban planning, and then I showed how modern transit could coexist with traditional modeling subjects. And I gave this first actually here at NMRAx in October 2021, and I debuted it in person at Indy Junction in May 2022. Some highlights in case you missed it. I showed the Atlanta streetcar named Undesirable, 48-ton transit inchworms, and the worst transportation project ever built. I also looked at DMUs in Escondido, California, and showed how it was very modelable for a small switching layout, and then eventually that became its own separate presentation. And then I ended by calling the hobby of model railroading a boomer nostalgia circle jerk, which, I mean, it's probably true. But the idea began with how I wrapped up the presentation with a teaser to model the near future. And my thinking behind this was that, say you model Kansas City, which does have a real-world streetcar, but say that you model this part of Kansas City, this rail yard over here, which does not have a modern streetcar. So my idea was that you could just proto-freelance an extension of the streetcar over to the portion of Kansas City that you model. And this was a way to relate modern transit to regular model railroading subjects for a comparatively easy and achievable way. But days before Indy Junction, the idea, well, it grew a little bit. The idea was to model the actual near future. And the thinking here is that state departments of transportation often publish plans and blueprints freely available in document archives, and so you will know what certain transit systems look like well in advance of their existence. And so now the idea was not just to proto-freelance a system, instead you could prototype model something that just hasn't been built yet. And this reminded me of another touchstone. Back when I lived in Seattle, in 2015, the Seattle Transit blog wrote this fantastic article, "We Need More Options Across the Mountains." So for anybody who remembers, that was a really snowy year. And to anybody who doesn't know the region, there are only about 4 major east-west routes across the Cascades in Washington state. And I think Washington is, what, over 300 miles tall? And only one of them is an interstate highway. So with just a little bit of snow, the state's transportation infrastructure can be very very badly impaired. And what this article proposed is that Cascades already runs north-south through Seattle, so why not just send one east-west along the old route of the Empire Builder, expand service to Ellensburg, Yakima, and Pasco, and then bring it back to Spokane as another transit alternative. And then, if this works successfully, maybe you can rebuild a segment of the old Milwaukee Road route as a cutoff between Ellensburg and Ritzville. And if you do that, it actually becomes time competitive with driving. And so, thinking about this, I thought, why not model a near future passenger train? I think this would be a very interesting idea that I don't think anybody has considered before. But it's just an interesting idea. It's not what I'm modeling, right? Right? Anyway, speaking of, what is it that I model anyway? Well, when I lived in New York, I discovered the Lilliputians, the main 2-foot gauge railroads, and I read the fantastic book by Linwood W. Moody. I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful read. And I discovered the Kennebec Central, which was the smallest of them all, at a mere 5 miles long by 2 feet wide. And I kind of tried to make a little bit of an ill-fated Free-moN module system modeling the end of the line in Togas, but it never really went anywhere. But then, of course, I moved to Pennsylvania for graduate school, and you bet that a major reason why I moved to Pennsylvania for graduate school is, you know, the railroad history. So the moment I arrived on campus, I started researching all of the interesting things. The most famously, of course, the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Locomotive Works, where you can see, wait, what's that? Zoom, zoom, zoom. Allow me to introduce to you the Altoona and Beech Creek, or the amusingly acronymed A&BC. It was a very tiny little railroad that ran across, literally across the street from the Juniata Locomotive Works, up the mountains to the Wapsanonoc Hotel, which had some attractions and Victorian-era strolling gardens. It was very popular for weekend picnics and workers' retreats. But then, of course, the main reason for it, it went a little bit farther to some coal mines at Doherty, and it brought the coal down the mountain to the communities of Altoona and Juniata for people to heat their homes. And while I was researching this, I happened to find a newspaper publication for the schedule for the railroad, and I just, a little experiment, I put that into a streamlined diagram to see how the train would run, and then once I had that, I just expanded it a little bit more and added probably more freight trains than the railroad ever saw during its existence, but this gave me some ideas, and then I just kind of came up with the idea for a track plan, and then because I have no self-control, I started building the track plan, and well, then the layout got to like a mostly finished state. It still exists right now. Well, we'll talk about what's happening to it later. But also during this time, I was a member of the Penn State Model Railroad Club, and I did a bunch of things with them. I built an ON30 pizza layout based on the Calico Mine train for use at their involvement fairs. We also started making a bend track switching layout that was supposed to be era ambiguous, kind of like everything from the 1940s onward. And oh, look, there's me in the background right there. Oh, I miss Blake. Anyway, but during this time, I needed to have some personal equipment that I could run on the club. But I was modeling in the wrong scale and the wrong era. And the way that people normally do things is they seriously model the diesel era and then have a few steam trains around for fun. But I was doing this backwards. I was seriously modeling the steam era, and I needed to have some diesel trains for fun. But the question is what to get, though, because depending on what locomotives I get, I might be tying myself to central Pennsylvania. And there's no guarantee that I'm going to stay here after a graduate school when I go in for a postdoc. So I might end up buying a model that I would never really use again. But then I came up with a very interesting solution. Don't get something for a single prototype railroad. Instead, get something from like the leasing unit companies like Progress Rail or GATX or FERX, or maybe one of the shortline conglomerate companies like Genesee in Wyoming or RJ Coring or SNS Shortlines. And the idea behind this is that you can find locomotives like these basically all over the country, and so I could take it with me wherever I go next as another fun club locomotive. But then all of a sudden, two things were released at once. First, Bachmann released their simply gorgeous models of the Siemens Chargers. And then I also discovered that a European company, Electrotrain, made a model of a Talgo pendular train set. And it just so happens that I remembered from years ago that somebody actually made a model on Shapeways of an Amtrak Cascades wing car. So all of a sudden, I now had all of the tools necessary to model a Cascades Talgo. But unfortunately, this falls into the same problem as the diesel locomotives. Cascades is prototypical to a place and a time, and anywhere outside of that place and time, it looks, well, out of place. Okay, there are some other options. There's the demonstrator train, which toured the country in the 1990s and is ultimately what sold WashDOT on buying some. There was also the Milwaukee pair, intended for use between Madison, Milwaukee, and Chicago, until Scott Walker became the pure incarnation of evil and took away my trains. But again, these are still too niche. They're still tied to a time and a place. But what if I told you that the original Cascades Talgos weren't the only ones built? There was a fifth. Allow me to introduce to you the Las Vegas Talgos. These were intended to run between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. And guess what? They actually ran between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. So why the didn't it actually get turned into a regular running passenger train? I don't know. Oh, it drives me nuts, the car-brained politicians of the 1990s. But calm down before. Anyway, the real Las Vegas Talgos were bought by WashDOT and became the Mount Adams train set. And then very shortly thereafter, the business class and coach class cars were integrated into the other 4 Talgos in order to make them longer and have more capacity. And the cars which were duplicative, the 2 wing cars and the bistro cars, sat in this stumpy formation in the Seattle yard for basically the majority of their entire lifespan. And to anybody who knows, the majority of the cars involved in the 2017 Point Defiance bypass crash were from the original Las Vegas Talgos. And this led to the Federal Railroad Administration condemning the original Talgo train sets as not crash-worthy enough, and it led to the so-called Cascades Talgo funeral train. But moving past that a little bit, here's an idea. Maybe I can just proto-freelance the Las Vegas Talgo and pretend that it was purchased by bracket State Department of Transportation of wherever I move to next, close bracket. And this, again, it would allow me to bring this wherever it is that I go to any future clubs. And this has some brilliant side effects. First off, I can kind of mostly reuse the existing Electro Train paint scheme as an interim paint scheme while I paint things up. And then I can also pair it with the Bachmann Surfliner Charger. So this is a fantastic excuse. I mean, opportunity to model a modern passenger train set. But it's all just for fun, right? It's not like I'm modeling it anyway, seriously, right? Right? Well, wait a second. Ah! What if I use the Las Vegas Talgo to model an as-of-yet unbuilt passenger train? Okay, this is an interesting idea, but there are too many options. What do I look for? Where do I start? Okay, well, let's start by looking at places that have current high population density. This means that it can support intercity rail transit. This is U.S. Census data, by the way. But let's also pair it with the places that are growing. These are the places that are more likely to invest in building new infrastructure. All right, let's pair them with each other to find the places that have the density and are ascendant enough. And then let's also wrap on the Amtrak Connectus map. And there are certain areas that really definitely poke out as being worth investigation. All right, so what can we see here? I investigated all of these with the OpenStreetMap, which at times is better than Google Maps, in part because it more clearly shows railroad tracks and whether or not they're in service. It also names some of the industry, but probably the most important thing, it names the subdivisions of the railroads that that particular track is a part of. And that is extremely useful for follow-up research to like see what kind of the major traffic is or what railroad built it originally and its history and so on. All right, so the first one that I want to look at is the Texas Triangle. This is interesting. It's a major railroading hub, large populations. There's already light rail and streetcar systems in Dallas and DMU systems as well, but also somewhat low frequency, like 2 daily round trips, 3 daily round trips, not really that much. There's also some potential competition from the Texas High-Speed Rail, and also, yeah, Texas doesn't want me to exist, so I'm going to pretend that Texas doesn't exist. By the way, I can't wait to see all of you at the NMRA National later this year in East New Mexico. There's also the Southern Cross. This is a growing region with a very good mixture of a bunch of big cities and small towns, but again, 2 trips a day, 3 trips a day, doesn't have the highest frequency, and is also a region that I don't have any personal connections to, and I find it somewhat unappealing. There's one possibility that I would consider, and that's Atlanta to Charlotte, and Charlotte does have streetcars and light rail systems, and it's a very nice city pair, and I also get to wrap in a good old-fashioned long-distance train, but also, again, 3 round trips, not that much, and I don't have a connection to the region. All right, well, there's also the southwestern Canada, again, very fast growing. Phoenix has a very successful light rail network. Tucson has a very successful streetcar, and there are also multiple intercity connections as well, but also also 2 major space-related universities in Phoenix and Tucson, so there's a very good chance that I could end up going there, but it is a hot desert of like endless suburbia, not exactly the most urbanist paradise in the world, so I don't know how fun it would be to model. All right, maybe front range passenger rail, getting better. Major space-related university in Boulder, that's good. Denver has a very large light rail network. It's popular, it's growing, it's progressive, and it has simply gorgeous scenery, the Colorado Front Range. Okay, that's good. But also, the Joint Line has been done to death by many modelers. And plans for front range passenger rail have been in the works since Atlantis sunk. So it's still a bit up in the air. Oh, well, I guess it was a fun idea while it lasted. I guess there really aren't any good proto-future types that I could look at modeling. Wait a second. What's that up there? Minneapolis and Duluth? Never heard of those. Okay. Northern Lights Express. 8 trains a day. Okay, that's getting better. Shorter distance, 2 fewer stations, so it's more modelable in a modest space, and it's also very likely to get built. Okay, this is interesting. In fact, it's what they call a shovel-ready project. It is completely planned out. They have blueprints for every single inch of the line. The only thing they're awaiting is funding. And they even came up with detailed schedules. So it's like the work has already been done for me. I know exactly what this would look like when it gets built. They even have plans for the station architecture. So even though it's not yet built, I have something to go off of. Now, I want to make the point here. It is now literally possible to model the future as a prototype. So this is very interesting. It starts at Target Field Station in downtown Minneapolis, which is much smaller and more modelable than St. Paul Union Depot or Spud. I just love that. It's also adjacent to Light Rail Station. It also would share the platform with Commuter Rail, currently to Big Lake, hopefully very soon to St. Cloud. And then also with this parking lot right here, I could build a very fancy modern head house befitting of a new modern passenger train. All right, looking at the other end, you have the Lake Superior Railroad Museum and the North Shore Scenic Railroad sharing space in the Duluth Depot. That's very interesting. They also have complete plans for a nearby layover facility, and it's very small and achievable for a mid-sized railroad. Okay, this is starting to look good. Nothing's perfect, unfortunately. It's the wrong station, and so it misses a connection with the Empire Builder. There are also enormous unmodelable yards in Minneapolis-St. Paul. There are long, boring stretches of track filled with irrelevant Lake Wobegon communities along the way, and there's a mess of tracks in the Port of Superior as well. The Duluth Station Museum doesn't exactly scream future, does it? And there are also some problematic highways in Duluth that obscure the tracks, and it would be very difficult to operate. And then across the entire route, there are a series of low bridges that preclude intermodal traffic. So really the only freight traffic that this line sees are long, boring unit trains. So at least for a while, it was also politically uncertain. I think literally as of a few days ago, it finally got funding. But I was on the fence because I didn't want to get too invested in something that ends up failing. And then I would only be reminded of sad things whenever I look at my model railroad. But okay. Maybe, is there a way we could fix this? Allow me to introduce to you the Northwest Passage. Because of global warming, ice is retreating, and it's now actually possible to go north over North America from the Pacific to the Atlantic. And paradoxically, this is a shorter route that ends up saving on fuel emissions. And so it's a very interesting irony of the world at this point in time. But I have an idea. What if your cargo is actually destined for the middle of America? Why not just divert it from this route and take it to maybe a new container port in Hudson's Bay? This means you don't have to pay for the really long and expensive transcontinental route across the Rockies in America, and you also don't have to waste time going all the way to the Atlantic and then backtracking. You could just pick up the cargo from Hudson's Bay and then take it due south into the United States. All right, so what would we do with this? Here's the current route of the Northern Lights Express. Maybe you could build new track to, say, Thunder Bay in order to shorten a route to the Midwest. And this would add traffic to this route and more diverse freight as well. Also much better scenery right on the shore of Lake Superior, and a much more balanced layout, which has 2 ends and a middle, as opposed to just basically only 2 ends. Now, this is a fascinating idea, but it's a bit much even for me. It's a little bit out there. Well, I guess I shan't model a passenger route from the Amtrak Connectus plan after all. Or I could look at other regional plans that were not put in the Amtrak Connectus map. Allow me to introduce to you Zip Rail. This was a plan in the 20-teens for an extension. It would connect Minnesota's 3 largest cities, Minneapolis, Rochester, and the other one. And it's really important because in Rochester, there's the Mayo Clinic, which of course has a world-quality medical care, but currently the only way to actually get to it is to fly into the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport and rent a car. And your ability to get world-class medical care should not be dependent on your ability to pay for and drive an automobile. So that's bad. So this extension would be really important. But there's one problem, though. It lacks an existing rail line. There has never been a direct connection between the Twin Cities and Rochester. But just say for the sake of argument that we were to build this and build some new track, how would we get there? Well, the most direct route is probably from Red Wing, which is the station on the Empire Builder, but unfortunately that's not practicable because you run into the Mississippi River bluffs. All right, maybe we come over from Northfield. That's a much better option. It's much flatter, and it also just runs only through Farmers Field, so presumably land acquisition wouldn't be too difficult from there. Actually getting to Northfield, you probably would take the Union Pacific Albert Lea subdivision, but there's unfortunately one problem. There is an absolute mess of tracks actually getting to Northfield. Enormous yards, endless switching areas. Half of a very large layout would be just switching areas in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and it would be impossible to model faithfully. So it's an excellent real-world train, but a poor modeling subject. Or we could take another route out of the Twin Cities. The Dan Patch line was long considered for commuter rail expansion until an idiot congressman passed a ban on studying it for commuter rail in 2002. But it's a natural extension south out of Target Field Station, which of course has the North Star commuter rail, but also that's where the Northern Lights Express would be. It's currently partially operated by the Minneapolis, Northfield, and Southern Short Line, and also partially rail banked for future use south of Savage. But it's recently been revived under the Central Minnesota Passenger Rail Corridor, which is a way to get around the ban on the Dan Patch line. And so hopefully at some point we are going to see, however far in the future, commuter rail on this route. But now say we were to build this a track to Northfield, from Northfield to Rochester, I think there's some collateral benefits. Here is the current route of the Empire Builder and the soon-to-be so-called TCMC, Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago. I think they actually just funded it and gave it a name, the Great River. But here's a route going south out of Minneapolis to Rochester, and let's make it a nice regional route. Let's take it all the way south to Des Moines. Now, if you were to do this, you actually could reroute the Empire Builder and the TCMC for 2 additional free round trips a day between Minneapolis and Rochester. Those trains are already going to be running. Why not run them on this corridor too? And it also consolidates all of the Twin Cities area rail service. Instead of splitting it between St. Paul Union Depot and Target Field, now everything can go through Target Field, and you can have cross-platform transfers to other trains, like the new route proposed to Eau Claire, Wisconsin, or south from the Northern Lights Express. And then also you have the North Star service. Currently, it's only running between a literal Farmers Field in Big Lake and downtown Minneapolis. But if we're already investing in passenger rail infrastructure, let's just complete the region and extend it north to St. Cloud and south to Northfield, making it easier for people to have more frequent rail service. All right, this is a good idea. It also parallels the light rail extension. Currently, the Green Line is getting the Southwest Light Rail extension, and the freight trains and the passenger trains and the light rail would all be running side by side with each other for a long stretch. They're also, downtown Rochester is going to be getting a bus rapid transit system, and if this is already arbitrarily far enough into the future, let's just turn that into a rapid streetcar too. I mean, damn, I think this is too perfect to pass up. It has everything that I could ever want. I think I have no choice but to model it. Okay, okay. How could I turn this into a layout? Well, unfortunately, there's a little bit of a pikeability problem. It does hit all the major cities. It's a relatively linear route. It would be a good real-world train, but from a modeling perspective, it uses Canadian Pacific from Minneapolis to Mason City and Union Pacific from Mason City to Des Moines. So only the passenger trains would be able to run the entire length of the layout. All of the freight trains would be chopped in the middle. All right, well, maybe there's a way we can solve this. Maybe we focus only on Minneapolis to Mason City, and make this a Canadian Pacific focused layout, but we could also still have an extension to Des Moines and a Des Moines station. We'll just use a yard in Des Moines as kind of open staging, and then run Union Pacific shuttles from the yard in Mason City to the open staging in Des Moines. And that way, everybody can run along most of the length of the railroad. All right, let's do another option too, just in case. Let's abandon Iowa. And focus only on a passenger rail dense southeastern Minnesota. Let's just make this a very simple extension of the Northern Lights Express south to Rochester, but we can still keep the reroute of the TCMC and the Empire Builder as well. And the freight focus here would be kind of on a through bypass. Say that there's a lot of congestion on the Canadian Pacific yards in the St. Paul area. If they needed to get something onto the other side of the Twin Cities, or maybe it was just a through train entirely, they could route it around the congestion on this cutoff route, taking it into Minneapolis and getting it on the other side of those yards. Just renting some time from the Minnesota Department of Transportation on the new track. All right, there's also another option too. We can make the realistic option. We would use only existing track from Minneapolis to Rochester. And again, this could maybe be a much simpler extension of the Northern Lights Express. And then maybe we also extend it to Winona to offer transfers to the Empire Builder. But the focus here would be kind of more freight forward. It would be kind of like an urban switching railroad, and then maybe a little bit of fun with the DM&E main line. But okay, wait a second. I already have a layout. And this is the layout. Okay, well, but is there a way I could model them both? Is there anything that they could maybe share together that could save space? Maybe something like staging. Let's make them share some staging. And I'll make a large sliding drawer staging. This eliminates the problem of turnout ladders, and it also gives me a lot of extra tracks, so I can simultaneously store both the HO scale modern and the ON30 Victorian. And the only reason why this works is because they share the exact same track gauge. So that's kind of useful. All right, but now what do I do with it? I only have a staging yard. All right, well, maybe we minimize the scope. Maybe we focus only on Rochester, say. Make this a smaller one-town layout. But it would still preserve the main idea of a near-future heavy passenger railroading activity. And let's simplify. Let's nix the extension to Des Moines, and then just make this only a southern extension of the Northern Lights Express through Minneapolis. But we still get to keep the Empire Builder and the rerouted TCMC. Let's also, just for the hell of it, extend the North Star as well, all the way to Rochester, because I think Athearn already made models of it, so it's an excuse to run more trains too. And you know what, just for the hell of it, let's also add a regional DMU commuter train. And the idea behind this is twofold. Firstly, Owatonna might be really mad that they were bypassed by the construction of the new tracks. And so this would be a way to appease the people in Owatonna and give them access to the trains too. But it also could be used for a true commuting purpose. Say that in the future, Rochester has grown a little bit, and people wants to live in the quieter suburbs like Owatonna. This would be a way that people could commute from the smaller towns into the Mayo Clinic for work and then back. So yeah, that's a fun way to do it. And so I ended up building this. Or designing this. It's a twice around mainline run, so it gives me a lot of mainline for a very small space. I think it's only 7 by 14 feet, so yeah, I really don't have much space here. And yes, it is an obscenely narrow 30-inch aisle, and the only way to get there is roll under on a chair across 4 feet, but I'm young, I can bend over, and I'm already a lone wolf. Maybe someday in the future, when I have more space, I'll slice this open, extend it to the side, and then add a proper expansion or like swing gate for access there. But yeah, this is the best I can do with the space I have. But the main focus here is that it's going to be the town of Rochester and a main passenger yard sitting above staging. And just to orient you, so Minneapolis is going up to the upper left, Chicago is going to the right, and then Owatonna is the bottom left. But now, I'm just not done yet. I need to do something absolutely ridiculous. What is something that is absolutely inescapable, an unavoidable part of the modern world? Highways. So I'm planning on building, I have no idea how I'm going to do this, but I'm planning on building a 4-lane highway with operating cars using the Faller car system set. I might have some like operating city blocks here or something like that, but the main idea is we can hide the highway staging with curved backdrops, and then maybe hide the holes in the backdrop with the green highway exit signs. But I'm really hopeful that I can just replicate this beautiful segment from Amtrak Cascades, about 40 miles north of Portland for a surprisingly long distance. The railroad tracks run right down the median of the highway. Well, I guess the highway ran right down the railroad tracks because the tracks came first. But this allows for some absolutely gorgeous pacing shots. And honestly, I don't think anybody's done this before. Just imagine it. You can see a future passenger train running on the tracks and then little cars actively driving in front of it. It would be quite possibly the coolest thing I could do in model railroading. I really like this idea. I think it's really, really, really cool. All right, let's fill in some of the details. We can turn the streetcar, or turn the BRT into a streetcar, maybe just for the hell of it at a gas station. It will definitely be Sheetz and not Buc-ee's because Sheetz is better. And then maybe a pedestrian plaza next to the station, maybe a hip downtown neighborhood with lots of bars and streeteries and gastropubs. And then I could put a backdrop flat of the Mayo Clinic, and then maybe some 45-degree angle mirrors on the backdrop in order to extend it into the distance. And yeah, I know that's a very heavy passenger focus. So I'm building a contingency plan. Phase 2, we're going to build an upper deck, and this will be going to Owatonna. So coming from Rochester, we can add a DMU operations and maintenance facility just for fun. Then also maybe a park and ride as well. And then the DMU can end in downtown Owatonna, something like this. But the most important part here is that I actually have some freight tracks to do some freight switching. Maybe I can run this as something like a small switching railroad that interchanges cars with the mainline railroad. And then importantly, I'm also including upper deck staging on the other side of the backdrop as well, which will allow me the excuse to run freight trains the entire length of the visible portion of the layout. Say they're going westward all the way into South Dakota. or North Dakota. I forget. Now, what would operations look like? Well, obviously, the center focus would be the Northern Lights Express and the Cascade, or the Las Vegas Talgo train set running back and forth between Rochester and Minneapolis. Then, of course, there's going to be the DMU service coming from Owatonna, going to this little commuter platform right next to the passenger station. Then also, just for the hell of it, we can, like I said, because the models are already built, have the North Star extended southward, and it can share platforms with the commuter DMUs. And then also, don't forget, we can also have the streetcar, which would be a nice little pop of activity to the downtown. And then also the Empire Builder can make a daily visit as well in both directions. And you know what? In addition, the TCMC. But also, this is the near future. We can replace it the moment somebody makes a model of this. I'm going to get the new train sets. So basically, I have an excuse here to run practically every single passenger train I could ever want to in the entire country, all in one station in a surprisingly plausible manner. I mean, just, oh my goodness, this is too cool. And then, of course, if I ever get bored of passenger trains, I can have a constant parade of freight trains running through, going staging to staging. And then again, if I get even more bored of passenger trains, I can build the second deck, and where we take the DMU up and run it back and forth like a commuter service, and then bring freight trains to the upper deck as well to switch the industries, and then go all the way through to staging. So, like, again, yeah, basically everything I could ever want could be on this tiny little layout of 7 by 14 feet. Like, oh my goodness. So where am I now? Well, you bet that the moment I came up with this absolutely ridiculous idea, I bought wood before I even knew what sizes I was going to cut it to. The first hurdle was to build a staging drawer. I needed to find a way where I could build it and it wouldn't sag as you draw it out. I successfully achieved that. And I've also been collecting DMUs just in the event that I do get to be able to run them. So that's always a nice and fun thing to do. The next hurdle was to build Rochester, because since the staging drawer precludes supports for Rochester, Rochester would have to float over the length of 11 feet over top staging, and I needed to find up a way to do that without sagging. And it was successful. I used aluminum, I think, studs, and I turned them into girder beams. And they do seem to be holding without sagging. So that's the second challenge. And the very last challenge I have is to find a way where I can make all of the staging tracks mate successfully with each other at all of the drawer positions. If I can just do that, those are the 3 rate limiting steps, and I can go gangbusters building out the rest of the railroad, because, like I said, I have no self-restraint. But enough of my own individual antics. What can we learn overall from the story of my loony cognitive decline here? Well, first off, and most importantly, you need to take passenger trains whenever you can. Among other things, there are no middle seats, and the seats are made for comfort, not flotation. But I kind of want to make a bit of a broader argument here that I think, and to do that, I'm going to bring in some data. So as of last year, these were all of the Model Railroader magazine track plans in their track plan database, but sorted by the era of the track plan. And as you can see here, there is a massive overrepresentation of the transition era. And I'm a scientist, I had to take statistics classes, and when I see something like this, I see something's amiss. This is what a normal distribution, it's called, would look like, and you can see that there is over-representation of the transition era based off of what you would expect statistically, and there are missing popularities on the flanking dates. So, okay, well, I mean, we've all heard a bunch of reasons why the transition era is popular, but things like you get to run both steam trains and diesel trains, right? Well, actually, no. Diesels were invented in the 19-teens and popularized in the 1930s, and then since the end of steam, there's been an almost uninterrupted series of mainline steam excursions all around the country. And if you model a railroad that's too small to host a mainline steam excursion, well, you can choose one of the over 300 tourist railroads and museums still running excursions in the country right now. So, okay, that doesn't exactly hold water. All right, I've also heard that the 1950s is the glory days of small-town America. Well, actually, no, it wasn't. According to the U.S. Census data, the glory days of small-town America were the 1900s and 1910s, and they started to decline precipitously in 1920, and since that point, at no time has small-town America had more population than big city America. So that's not right. The 1950s is in the middle of its decline. Okay, well, I've also heard people say that it's the golden age of railroading. Okay, well, not really. I've also heard that applied to the 1890s and the present as well, or at least before the precision scheduled railroading. And then also the final excuse that people give for the transition era is you get to run streamlined passenger trains. Well, as I hope I've shown you over this presentation, you can do that at other times now too, especially now. Just take a look outside. That doesn't exactly work. And so I think that there's a little bit of a problem of a nostalgia fetish going on here. I once was told that every model railroad is autobiographical, and that means that people disproportionately model their childhood memories, which, I mean, it's important to remember that nostalgia is not the same thing as appreciating history. Far more often than not, it means that we gloss over serious flaws in favor of a simpler and more unrealistic historical narrative. Actual historicity involves acknowledging both the good parts of the past as well as the bad in equal or proportionate measure. Now, I want to make the point here. I understand the fascination with history. Remember, I started this presentation modeling the 1890s, but for the majority of the hobby to be about a return to an unrealistically idealized past, I think that there's a problem with that. But the thing that really grinds my gears the most is when people say trains aren't as important as they used to be, or trains aren't relevant to kids these days. And so I hope I have shown you over these three presentations that that is utter bullshit. Trains are almost as important as they used to be. Yes, the route mileage might be down, but that's not to say that they're absolutely dead. They exist. They are important. They just look different and behave differently from how they used to be. So I want to also make a point here that youngsters like trains, but they specifically like modern trains. And to show you, here are just the first 24 YouTube channels that I found on the subject of modern railroading and transit. And between them, they cumulatively have over 6 million subscribers. But the really important point here, more than half of these creators that I'm showing you are under the age of 30. Kids these days like trains, but they specifically like modern trains. And I honestly love the way that I ended my first presentation with a lovely little Punnett square, because I think it got the point across. 100 years ago, these were the things that you had running up and down most major cities of the Eastern Seaboard, and these were the models that you could buy at the time. You could take your train running around your Christmas tree, pick it up, walk down the road, and hold it next to the actual thing running through your community. These are the things that we have in over 60 cities in North America, in more than half of all states and provinces. And can you buy models of them? No, because they do not exist, because nobody makes models of them. Well, let's extend this Punnett square to passenger trains. These are the cities that kids these days care about. The data is unambiguous that younger generations disproportionately prefer walkable urban environments more than any other generation since the 1940s. But these are the things that people are modeling. Small towns and car-dependent cities. They do not work or do not look like the places that kids these days care about. Also, here are the passenger trains that kids these days care about, but here are the things that people model. Streamliners from the 1950s. There is an incompatibility here. And I think that this is kind of a little bit of a problem. Now, let's bring in some more data. These, as of just a few weeks ago, these are all of the locomotives that Rapido makes by the year of the prototype. And as you can see here, they make only one thing that has existed during my lifetime, ironically, an NPCU cabbage unit. And so, I mean, this is technically saying that my childhood memories matter less than the childhood memories of other people. That if you were born in the 1970s, yes, we'll make you all the product that you want. But if you were born in the late 1990s, yep, nope, you're on your own. It's technically structural inequality. Now, I will freely admit that the structural inequality of being systematically targeted by a police state and disenfranchised from generational wealth through redlining is probably a bit more important to deal with than the structural inequality of I can't buy my choo-choos. But you also would be hard-pressed to admit that this is a real phenomenon here. And so, okay, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that people get more nostalgic as they age, and also maybe older people have more purchasing power. So the reason why people aren't making things from as many modern locomotives is because the people who care about them are too young and not nostalgic and also can't afford them anyway. But I want to make the point here, what will people become nostalgic for? Will they become nostalgic for all of the transition era clubs that you see all across the country, modeling a period of time that they did not live in and a style of the world that is irrelevant to their lifestyles? Or are they going to become nostalgic for the things that they're actually doing in their childhood right now, like all of the various train simulator games? In fact, I recently learned there is a VR train simulator game called Derailed Valley. You can literally turn on the game, put on virtual reality goggles, and go for a walk through a railroad environment and operate trains that way. And so my worry is that people are going to get nostalgic for the things that they're actually doing in their childhood, like the computer games, and they're not going to become nostalgic for model railroading because the model railroading is not what they're doing now, because it's irrelevant to their lifestyle. And so model railroading, people will always love trains, but I worry we're going to soon get a generation of model computationalists who program their model railroads instead of actually build them in the real world, because they're not being appealed to right now. So to be clear, I'm not trying to cancel the transition era. My point is more that I think the hobby is in a bit of a rut. It's kind of stuck 40 years in the past and is having problems appealing to younger generations. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has to model the present or, God forbid, the future, but I think at least some of the hobby could evolve with the times. And to close, of course, the moment that I started investigating this railroad, I started reading up on Minnesota railroad history, and I stumbled upon this fantastic book that looks specifically at Minnesota railroading between 1940 and 2012. And in the introduction, he has this quote, and I know it's a bit long, but I think it's really important to listen to, because I think it makes a lot of the points that I'm trying to make here very well. Many railroad groups of the early 1970s had a nonchalant attitude. The steam engines and passenger trains they had grown up with were gone, and so were many of the railroads. They simply could not comprehend why I would want to go out and take pictures of contemporary railroading. Why do you bother, they would say. All the neat stuff is gone, and everything today looks the same. By the 1980s and 90s, I was no longer the youngest guy in our railroad groups, and another change occurred. People started to appreciate the photographs I had taken when I first started out. The lesson wasn't lost on me. Many things had changed, and somewhat by accident, others and I had been documenting those changes in photographs. While the public wasn't looking, railroads returned from the brink of oblivion and are now the forefront of transportation success and innovation. I look back on the slides I took at Dayton's Bluff in the 1970s and see weedy, uneven track and roadbed. The same area today has heavy welded rail, new signaling systems, and nary a weed in sight. This book is a salute to railroad history, but also recognizes that railroading is here to stay. Despite the colorful and fascinating past of railroads, their best days may still be to come. So, in conclusion, ultimately, why am I modeling the near future? First, I love the potential of modern, frequent regional passenger rail. I love the futuristic luster of a well-branded train set. I want to encourage the expansion and use of car-replacing infrastructure, and I am optimistic for whatever the future will hold. Thank you so much for listening to me today. Do I have any questions?
Ready for some questions?
Yes.
So, do you remember the name of that VR game where you could walk around in it?
Derailed Valley, it's called.
Valley. You went pretty fast through most of the slides, but you mentioned one train a couple of times. So I'm curious, why is there a need for the Empire Builder?
That's the premier long distance train running from Chicago to Seattle. It is the long distance train that has the highest ridership. It's also one that I've ridden multiple times before. But the main thing is it's the one that goes through Minneapolis. This is in the vicinity of Minneapolis. And so if I have an excuse to just slightly reroute it, then yay, I can run superliners too. Like I said, basically every train I could ever want.
So why Minneapolis?
I don't know. I don't have any connections. I just came up with the idea, and it was too good to pass up. And I have no self-restraint.
So you mentioned the ban that was put on some development south of Minneapolis.
Yes, the Dan Patch line.
Do you know why that is, or what the excuse is?
I think it was a conservative Congress or a state congressperson who did not like that the state was spending money on all of these corridor evaluations, and he was very certain that trains would never be the future. So he prohibited the state from spending from what he thought was wasting money on a project that would never be built. Obviously, I think it was very short-sighted. I think he's dead, thankfully.
Okay, so while we're on the political thing, why the dislike of Indiana?
Because they got rid of the Hoosier State. It was it has only one long distance train going through Indianapolis. That is the Cardinal, I believe, but it runs on a very odd schedule of once every other day. So they use half the number of train sets, and one day the train goes one direction, the next day the train goes the other direction, and then I think they take a single day pause over the weekend. So in order to complement that, they had the Hoosier State, which was actually not run with Amtrak equipment. It was run with I think Iowa Interstate or whatever the local railroad was. It was a very interesting brown and orange paint scheme, and the state contracted with this private company to run the passenger train between Indianapolis and Chicago on the off days that the Cardinal wasn't coming through town to restore everyday service instead of every other day service. But
Okay.
they pulled the funding on that.
So, a few real questions from the audience. If as you want to create non-existent trains, have you considered to freelance forward and extrapolate on how urban development goes? You can create a line that goes to a university that you create.
I was seriously considering that. I guess it will have to kind of have to be. I honestly don't know. Actually, that's a good point. I did in the second presentation propose that you could do a really fancy way of modeling this by extrapolating predicted urban growth patterns. And I guess to an extent I kind of have by like with the DMU running between Owatonna and Rochester, predicting that they would become part of a larger connected metropolitan community. But also I feel like there's a little bit of a stigma against that because it's going way too far in the direction of freelancing. And part of the fun appeal of this is that you are just tantalizingly close enough to reality that it would also be a good idea to make it a real train, not just a model.
When the Cascade train is located between two highways, which transport mode runs faster?
The trains, because they have the 79-mile-an-hour track speed, and also it's arrow straight. Whereas the two highway directions, they kind of take a little bit more of a looping route. Obviously, if you want to, as Lionel Strang says, observe the speed limit, but not necessarily take it into account, you can probably beat it. I actually, okay, now this is a very fun little story. Just a few months ago, when it finally became warm enough outside to motorcycle again, I actually raced the Amtrak Pennsylvanian on my motorcycle for almost 110 miles between Tyrone, Pennsylvania, and the trestle crossing the Susquehanna, and it was actually kind of really fun. There are a few segments of state highways that run right next to the tracks as well, and it was really cool. I just stayed on the side of the road until I saw the train in my rearview mirror, and I saw cars approaching in the other rearview mirror, and then I gunned it, and I ran right next to the P-42 Genesis for a surprisingly long distance. I think that is possibly the peak of most exciting experience of my life, just racing a train through the mountains for 100 miles.
I think you need to take one of those Chicago to Oakland, wherever the
California Zephyr. Yes, I have already taken that. Although I picked it up in Sacramento, not Oakland. So I do need to finish that.
Yeah, but I want you to be on your motorcycle when it leaves Chicago.
Okay, well that's the thing. I might be a little tired by the end of it. Yeah, I don't know.
Cool.
So, actually, on that note, in terms of Amtrak adventures, you wanted to know the 50th state that I haven't been to.
Yes.
That would be Oklahoma. And my plans are, when I do present in New Mexico later at the NMRA National, I'm going to take the Heartland Flyer north from Fort Worth into Oklahoma. I can't fly in because when do I get my 50th state? When we enter the airspace, when the plane hits the ground, when I exit into the airport, or when I exit the airport out of security. It's too ambiguous. But if I take the train, I have a physical state line that I'm passing. I'm definitely going to bring a full suitcase of champagne for everybody else on board.
So how many of these 49 states have you ridden a train in?
Not as many. The major routes that I've taken are portions of the Capital Limited, a lot of the stuff in the Northeast, and then the Empire Builder and California Zephyr, and the Coast Starlight too. So I'm kind of missing. Oh, and I also did the Crescent to New Orleans, I think 2 years ago. But I'm kind of missing the Desert Southwest. I need to get the Southwest Chief and the Sunset Limited in there somehow. I'm saving the Sunset Limited until it extends finally back to at least Orlando, and then I can finally take a 3-day coast-to-coast train.
So you might have to start a new list. The states traveled by rail.
I have a spreadsheet that I'm using to keep track of my Amtrak mileage. It will be very easy to add states to that too.
Cool. Then the last comment was, something I believe we discussed last time on your 4th series, including Europe.
I am atometrically close to running away to the Deutsche phone world and never coming back because they have so many trains. Like, especially Switzerland. Oh, that is train paradise. Yeah, who knows? I might have to. But for now, I already took almost a full year off of model railroading my own layout just to put together these 3 presentations. I think I need to just calm down and keep it in 3 parts just for now.
Cool.
Just for now.
So I beg you to stay in the States until you reach the 50th. At least do
Oh,
that.
Of course.
So for the audience, please remember that we have breakout rooms at werby.com//OMRG, Oscar, Mary, Rudolph, George. Brad also put it in the chat in both systems. And then remember, the next NMRAx is on June 24th. And with that, thank you for sticking with us. And thank you, G4, for another fast-paced but awesome clinic.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
And then we wait for Brad to slide us out. In 3, 2, 1. Come on, Brad, you can do it. I hope he's okay.
I hope he didn't forget about us.
And the audience is just watching.
Oh, goodness, I don't know what to do now. Is it time for like a stand-up comedy routine?
Well, don't say don't say anything that gets us in trouble.
Oh, definitely. Not more trouble than I've already put myself in. All right, so whenever I'm at a physical presentation, I kind of do a little bit of a stand-up comedy routine while we're waiting for the time to approach. I used to work at the Northwest Railway Museum, and I had a lovely safety presentation when I was a car attendant. Please keep all hands, arms, feet, legs, small children, hopes, dreams, and other lawsuit-worthy items inside of the car at all times. In the event that the car plummets from 32,000 feet in the air, oxygen masks will deploy from the compartments above your head. In the event of a water landing, your most irritating member of your party can be used as a flotation device. If you happen to lose anything on board the train today, you can check out our lost and found website at www.ebay.com.
It will be at the river mouth. And you say hopes and dreams, right? Yeah, Brad forgot about us.
Oh, well. Should I exit the Werby here and go to the breakout room chat?
Like I always said, you click the red door, you close the tab, you close the
Mhm.
browser, or you put your finger on the power button for 4.5 seconds.
And then turn it back on again and go to, what is it, werby.com/OMRG?
OMRG.
All right, perfect. I guess I will see you there.
Oh, goodbye. Yes.